Good evening, all, and welcome to this week's slice of Midweek Geek. I should do that sort of intro every week and have some sort of da-da-da-da type music or something, or maybe not. I did forget to mention to a lot of people that British clocks changed last weekend, so we shifted by an hour compared to America and Canada and whatever. But that I think your clocks change next weekend, don't they, Elfbait?
I don't pay attention to that. Time has no meaning to me.
There's always one. It's always 1 week out. I know because I watch the NFL, and there's always 1 week where all the matches start at 5 o'clock instead of 6 o'clock.
Now that I don't have any commute or anything, it doesn't matter to me.
No, I suppose not. Right. This weekend, Badger's Musings and Halakar both confirm that. We are. Are we a week? Are we an hour later for you? That might suit you, American chaps, on this stream, because we normally have a sort of a surge about 2.5 hours in, where lots of people suddenly come in as we're talking nonsense and we've covered all the topics that we're going to talk about, and suddenly I see viewer levels go. They start off at about 20, then drop to about 10, and suddenly we're up to 25 when it's time to go. What happens. It's what happens. So let's say hello to everybody. You can see I'm joined by Elfbait and Saxius, two familiar faces, familiar voices. And in chat, we have Mage's Musings, we have Halakar, we have Gumpeld Slan, there's Saxius chiming in, and we have Calstaff as well. There are 8 people in chat at the moment, though. Only 4 have said hello. Here's Blaine as well. So, good evening, everybody. Trust you are. Hello, Shadow and Sun, jumping across from James's Street. I trust you are all well. I trust you've all managed to get some gaming in the last 7 days.
No.
Oh.
We had some health issues around the house, so we had to cancel Monday. So.
Right, fair enough. Hello, Extras. I don't recognise you. Are you new to my stream, or are you just a changing of names? Hello, Fred. Hello, Squirrel Hermit. Well, I played in DK's game on Saturday night. Complete gonzo nonsense. We didn't do any fighting or anything like that. But it was still the usual silly fun and joking around. And then I ran a Halloween game of Cthulhu on Monday night. I would say you'll have seen my review of the adventure I used, but it hasn't had that many views, so I doubt many people have watched it.
I saw it.
But what I thought was amusing today, when I checked on the video today, it's a Halloween Cthulhu adventure, and it had 66 views and 6 comments, which I thought was a very apt combination of numbers.
That means it's evil.
Yes.
By 80s logic, it's the devil.
Hello, Duralumin. I'll put up an event regarding MERP so you can adjust times accordingly. I imagine it will be at 3 your time, because I think your clocks will shift on the Saturday night. So yeah, I think MERP will be an hour different to last time. I'll have to let Aldarian know as well, and General Nut, the other 2 players in that game. But thanks for reminding me there. Right, but yeah, our game on Monday night, the game went really, really well. Got through a bit of a slow start. It was a very role-play heavy scenario, and to be honest, it is a very linear scenario, and it does force feed the players information at specific points. It very railroady, but it was different. It was unusual, designed to be more psychological, more sort of player versus player, character versus character conflict, and threat. The main chance of dying in it is being shot by the other characters, which gave it a slightly different edge. Especially when there was one character bleeding to death and the doctor in the group was saying, "No, I am not going anywhere near him. No, you won't tell me what to do. You'll give me the gun. I don't trust any of you who are carrying the guns at the moment." It's that sort of thing. And that character actually bled to death because the doctor refused to treat him.
Nice.
when I was watching the your video on that, it reminded me. Have you ever seen a movie called The Bunker?
Right? No, I haven't, but
All
sounds
right,
like a
so it's a horror movie, but it is kind of awful, but also kind of cool. Um, it's got a bunch of Australians, I think, playing fleeing SS, um, but they don't drop their accents. So it kind of it breaks you out of the immersion. But the premise is that a bunch of SS that are retreating from the Eastern Front, just like kind of deserters come across this bunker, and they decide to hunker down in it. And it's the cool thing about the whole movie is you're never sure all the way up into the end if it's actually haunted or if they're just tweaking out because they're shell shock and probably all the methamphetamines they've been pounding to keep going. So
Is it a horror in a traditional sense, or is it more psychological?
more psychological. Like I said, by the end of it, you really it's it's impossible to tell if there was ever actually a haunt.
See, I'd probably quite enjoy that, because the only reason I don't watch horror films is I'm really, really squeamish. I don't like the sight of blood.
I mean, there is some blood and stuff in there, but it's yeah. So you probably aren't, and not to mention,
I quite enjoyed the Blair Witch Project, for example, because there's no real gore in it, no massive frights, but it is the constant on edge nature of the whole.
Yeah.
You don't know what's happening, and neither do they, and the way it feels real, even though you know it's not. The way it feels.
Well, it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt that they did the marketing they did on that was so great that I remember my buddy and I even at one point going, "Yes, I seem to remember hearing about that when it was in its early campaign, and you didn't even know there was a movie coming out," because that's the kind of stuff that it's all over the place here in the U.S. anyways. Teenagers go into the woods, they don't come out. But
yeah. I guess it's a sort of a worry that a lot of families have as well, and probably almost an irrational fear, but it's a fear that exists.
That's a movie that really splits people. There's a whole lot of people like, I found it hokey and I could never get beyond it. And I'm like, and then there's me who's been terrified in the woods before. And like, all right, this is kind of my cousin at one point when we were kids had me convinced we were lost in the woods, just to the point of, we were like maybe 9 or something like that. Just to the point where I'm just in tears thinking we're lost. Right. And then he walks me over a hill and there's a highway and a shopping center. It's just the way the land was set up, rolled around there. None of the sound of any of that made it over the hill. So as far as I knew, I was in the middle of nowhere. And then
the key was you believed you were lost.
In the Pacific Northwest, in the middle of the woods, off trail and lost. And then my cousin's like, ha ha. I'm like, and I'm bigger than he is. So there was an ass whooping.
Oh, so Saxius, did you play this week?
Oh God, yes.
Oh, good.
There has been gaming, yes. My second edition group, they have successfully negotiated with the thieves and with the different criminal organizations. They have brokered a peace for the time being, and they managed to out one of the groups for having broken some rules in front of one of the region's higher representatives, who just looked at them and went, all right, well, you've broken these rules, you're now going to get taxed heavily. So they got a fine of 23,000 gold there on the spot, which was quite the thing that had some of the players going oh, okay, that's scary when you've got independent crime organizations being told yeah, here's a fine from your betters. And they have to pay it, because otherwise, it's going to be open hunting season, or you're going to have thief mages show up with a license to murder. And no one wants that. So they've had fun with that. One of the players leveled up. He is now level 9. So I've had a sit down with him and to discuss what he wants to do, because technically he's meant to now become a lord. The player doesn't have the interest of acquiring land and all that. So we discussed the idea that he is now going to become a mercenary company leader instead. And that's actually perfect, because we are having a situation where bulwarks a lowly level monster has reappeared, but they are attacking the granaries in the lead up to winter. So a very serious situation,
Yeah.
especially since bullywugs in my world are known for once they get their little, slippery claws on food, they multiply like, well, cockroaches. So they're a force that people don't underestimate. And I continue with the Shadowrun, where the players did very good in terms of investigating. There was a lot of, going into the cyberverse, interrogating, phoning up contacts, bribery, and using it, because I made everyone participate in building the 3x4 block that they live in. So everyone was trying to like pull contacts and do their thing. And it ended with a very nice combat scenario where we got to learn the rules a lot more. And then I have been running the DM turn, where I'm so glad I found this, but the DM turn has led to some very good background events that the players can now enjoy, like criminal gangs deciding that they've had enough of the police force and just going out into open warfare with them in the streets. So that's having some consequences that the players can either exploit or ignore or avoid. So
plenty of gaming, and sounds like gaming that you can get your teeth into as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Anyway,
I've just been working on stuff.
It's the prep work that makes the game so much better when you're prepared for it.
Yeah.
I had all these majestic plans for what I was going to do over the weekend and my 2 days off work on Monday, Tuesday, and I did very little on Saturday. Played in the evening. Did very little on Sunday, apart from go and watch my daughter play football. They won 7-0, hurrah! And didn't do enough on Monday either. But such is the way. Such is the way. Anyhow, I'm just going to add a fourth person to the stream. Another familiar face and familiar voice and a familiar beard.
Such is the way.
Hello, Gingerbeard. How are you doing?
Good. I'm actually a reasonable time today.
And if we'd have played last night, I would have mentioned the game I had with you, but we didn't play. So
no.
No.
Unfortunately, other player couldn't make it, and I got stuck at work. I hope everyone enjoyed their census outputs for the UK this morning. That was a bust.
Oh, right. Oh, you were partly responsible for that, were you? I haven't looked at it yet, but anyway, we have a topic for tonight, and a few months back, I did ask on my
Discord
in the Discord, yes, for suggestions for topics, and Zach just came up with 4 topics, and this is the 4th one of his. So we've got him to thank for it again, and it is rules that you like. I'm guessing as a DM, but your players don't.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you've got this as a topic for a reason, Zach.
Well, I just seem to come across in my experience a number of times where I go, because I like to start off with, a session 0 to sort of, lay down the foundations of what the expectations are, where I lay out, well, here are some rules that I would like to introduce and that I would like to use to enhance the game. And I've just either met crickets, outright disgust, or just been told to F off for the ideas that I put forward. And it is just down to that some of the things that I want, maybe as a DM, or that I enjoy as a masochistic player, many players just do not align in what I want, or what I want to go through, or what I want to put them through, because I think it's fun. So I figured it would be a nice chance for everyone to sort of say, well, here are some rules that I like, either from rules as written, homebrewed, or things that you've seen from other games yourself, and you've gone, I really like that, I did not like that, and let's just discuss, some of the merits we have for it, the reasoning we have behind it, why it was shut down, why it was something that we wanted to put forward, and just sort of lay it out there, because it's the rules and the flavoring that we bring in as well as the interpretations, they help enhance the game in their own unique way. But it's often down for, does your group have the same view of what they want, and do they want to then go through said experience? That's the groundwork for that.
Yeah, I'm just checking. Yeah, I see. I bet you picked up that question from Shadow and Sons. I was just going to flag that up, but yeah, okay. My own experience, I tend to drop rules from rules as written more often than not, and I tend to find things happen in reverse. In that, I have a habit of dropping things that I think my players do like because I don't like them. But in terms of I'm thinking of really about the current games that I've run. I'm running, and they are 5th edition MERP, 1st edition, and Call of Cthulhu. They're the main 4 games that I've run in the last 10 years. And in general, with the exception of 5th edition, my players don't tend to know the rules of the game all that much. So I tend to avoid these sort of issues.
Well, you could just tell them anything's a rule, and they'd believe you then. Just
my players don't know any better usually, so, and I like it that way because that means I can pretty much do what I want to do without them chuntering. Oh, it says this in the book. I don't get very little of that. One experience I had was with me trying to enforce spell components and insisting that a 5th edition mage found their spells rather than automatically learned and chose a new one whenever they gained a level. In which case, my plan was to drop a few more spells out there for them to choose from, but not necessarily the ones that they might pick. So the mage would, when they got to 3rd level, for example, they'd probably have access to 3 2nd level spells, whereas by the rules, as standard, they'd only have 1. But they pick that one, whereas they'd instead have access to the 3 or so that I'd rolled or picked for them. And that player in particular kicked off. But he got binned from the group anyway because he was a knobhead. Nobody liked him. He was a bit of a control freak. But so that's sorry, a little bit of an aside. Have you got an example of a rule then, Saxius, that you enforce that your players dislike?
No, because with the ones that I usually want to enforce, either I enforce the rule, lose the group, or I have to basically start a group from scratch to bring that in. And more often than not, the current group I've got going is 7 years in going, and I kind of like these players, so I'm not going to do it. But I often still try to turn around and say, "Hey, let's try this," and they go, "No, go away."
What they told you to go away about?
I take encumbrance to another level. So you've got your encumbrance. You also have to track where it's located in. So far, so good. And I put weight limits for how much you can put in a bag. So you want to carry 500 pounds worth of stuff, but you've only got 1 rucksack. Well, that rucksack can only have, let's see, like 80 to 120 pounds worth of items in. Sure, I'll give you like 10, 15% additional pounds that you can then strap around it, like a very well provisioned, hiker would do, make full use of it and just keep a note of what is outside, what is inside, because weather and tear can then become a thing. And my players just look at me and go, "We're not doing that. That's not happening. We're flat out refusing to do this." All right, fine. It's not something that's going to break it for me, but it's because I want to reinforce the idea of survivalism within D&D, especially adventurers, when you leave adventuring, you should not be like, oh, I'm just a day away from town. Anything within 48, maybe even 72 hours should be well controlled by that city. That should not be running goblins amok unless you are very close to like a very dense forest that is chaotic and very
on a
difficult
frontier.
to
Which on a frontier.
exactly
Yeah.
exactly. But if you are where most games take place, which is within a civilized area, within regular patrols, well, again, just my examples as in this case, that then this should not be the case. You should have gone for at least half a week, possibly even more, into the wilderness to find these places. And that means I want to track, food, rations, not so much, make sure you go and get water, potentially even bring out the whole thing of like, oh, you say you brought out water, but none of you are hunters. You never really lit a fire. You're just drinking water straight from the stream. Roll some constitution saves and let's see if someone catches some parasites or someone gets the shits. These are the sort of things I would love to bring in.
I hope they would make the proper survival checks to find the streams that are okay to drink out of.
Exactly. And this is then where I sort of turn around and say, right, this is where proficiencies and the backgrounds of the characters become extraordinarily important, because if you have a blacksmith, my god, that is going to be the most important guy in the group when it comes to maintaining your weapons, helping to do a little bit of armor repairs, all of these things. Having a hunter, tracking, gathering food, knowing a few areas, as well as like basic things that you need to live off from. Good. A ranger would be even better, significantly better, but that's just because I'm utterly biased for rangers and priests and all of these other capabilities. Hell, if you were a character and you came in and you come from the background of being an appraiser, well, in the middle of the dungeon, being able to tell the difference between the golden statue that is actually just fake gold, it's fool's gold, versus the other items that are made out of genuine gold. That is the sort of thing that is going to be making a difference, because you are going to have weight limitations for what you can bring back. And especially if you're doing things like gold for XP and the other things to reward and encourage the players to do these things. That's brilliant. So these are some of the examples that I have where I want to take the survivalism or the challenges of a group going into the wilderness, into that level of where they go like, okay, well, we actually have to be somewhat competent in what we do. And I will assume your characters are competent. However, sorry,
I'm speaking of. They're talking about you, Saxius.
kind of like torturing. I bring a very specific stick to this stream, and I hope it entertains you all.
I have to say, in general, it looks like chat are agreeing with you, and I agree with you as well. I like the bookkeeping side of adventuring, and I wish that I like the players I play with, but I do wish sometimes that they would invest themselves a bit more in the bookkeeping side. I wish I didn't have to sort of shoehorn them into the idea of keeping a map and keeping a log of their loot and all that sort of stuff. I want them to note things down. I want them to make records. I want them to keep track of what they're carrying. But some of them seem to have an aversion to writing anything down, which is something I battled with that group for quite a while. They'd say, "Oh, didn't we find something about that 3 or 4 weeks ago?" And I'd be like, "Well, have you got it written down on the sheet?" And they'd look at me and say, "John, we don't write things down." And I'd be there going, "Yeah, I know, but you know what I tell you, you should be doing." And I would have put my house on you mentioning encumbrance as probably being the first thing.
Well, that is the first of many.
Knowing your love for the whole spreadsheet side of things, and
you don't even need the spreadsheet. You just need to know what the fuck you're doing. Like, it's not.
Yeah.
It's again, it's different styles, and it's down for what you want out of the game. Many players come in and thinking like, I just want to escape reality. I don't want to go from my accounting job to accounting my fantasy stuff, because that's for some players that's not fun.
With D&D Beyond, it's even easier to do encumbrance now, so I don't know why people are complaining. It'll sit there and tally up all your equipment weight and then tell you when you're lightly, heavily encumbered. So if you've got a program that does it, you have no excuse. It's like,
I mean, I'm the sort of player who says, "Oh, great, we're in town. I've only got 4 arrows left. I need to go and buy some more," because I've been
Same
tracking
here.
them. I've been tracking them.
I like getting stuck in a corner running out of supplies. It's like, we're 4 levels down in the dungeon. I'm out of water and I'm down to my 3rd arrow,
Exactly. I like that, yeah. Ginger, is there any rules or any things that you like? Or
No, sorry, I was just about to go on a tangent about
Go on.
DK's Saturday game, where we always have that thing of like, shit, we need to buy rations, but then I can't keep track of who was the one player who was meant to be tallying the party funds and who's taking it out.
It was Weeb, but he's not been there all the time, so he's sort of lost track. He's got completely different numbers in terms of how much gold we've got to what I've got written down.
That's what really messes it up when you have one allocated party treasurer who doesn't turn up every week and you don't do it through like a shared spreadsheet.
Yes. I say hello, Omen Owl.
Hello.
Hello.
So far, so good. Just trying to stop people from doing stupid stuff. So,
All right. So let's go and see what chat have said. Chat haven't been overly busy tonight, mostly talking about Saxius. So I'm going to bring up this one here, and this go. I mean, I did the thing on the Dungeoneer Survival Guide yesterday, which bizarrely has blown up in terms of popularity. I don't know why people are watching videos about a book that was quite niche and not all that popular.
I don't know if it wasn't that popular at the time. Because, boy, when non-weapon proficiencies came out, that was kind of unique to D&D, and they went, "Oh my god!"
But they've been in Oriental Adventures, which had come out beforehand, and in Dungeons & Survival Guide only really had half of the non-weapon proficiencies.
Yeah, but everyone
you just don't see books like that, though, is the thing. I mean, a lot of your traffic right now is that kind of a book there's all sorts of little books on how to do that nowadays, but nothing. I don't think a lot of people know that there was ever a big official hardback AD&D book for it.
You know what, though? If we're going to talk about rules, I think that they actually had you took damage over time for the Wilderness Survivals Guide if it was bad weather.
yes.
It was like
one reason I brought up Halakar's comment here is that I'm guessing quite a lot of this was in the Wilderness Survival Guide, which is a book I didn't buy. I flipped through a friend's copy of it, and I have a PDF of it, but I've never read it, and I've never wanted to rebuy it. And if I'm going to take a look at it, I'm going to have to browse through a digital copy and just read it from start to finish, which is going to take a long time because I've never really paid much attention to it. But I know this sort of stuff is in it in terms of heat damage, cold damage, thirst, hunger, fatigue, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the tsunamis. I like the volcanoes. That was the stuff I really cared about. But you're right. A lot of this was in there, and it was to give you. I think, unlike the Dungeoneer Survival Guide, the Wilderness Survival Guide really opened up a huge section that had been kind of ignored. I think, even though I know some of it's in the D&D, but it kind of ignored a lot of the aspects for it. Pyroclastic flows and other things that I thought were pretty cool. So,
aren't you a geologist?
well,
I was going to say that may not be as interesting to other people as you think it is.
Well, having worked with geologists, it amazes me on how much they will actually sit under something. You're like, this is not OSHA safe, and we'll drag them away from standing under, a rock overhang that has obviously fallen recently, and then there's still more of it. You're like, I don't have to do a write-up on this.
Oh yeah, I understand how that is. I just spent a good chunk of the weekend with my brother and his mathematician dad. They're both math majors. His dad's a mathematician, but he's also got a degree. And the interesting conversation between those two, I'm like, well,
anyway, the reason I wanted to come to this comment is these are sort of things that certainly when I was 15, 16, 17 and lapping up new rules, trying to absorb as much of them as possible, I wanted to incorporate in a game. And I would still like to run something that really takes into account the survival aspects. But at the moment, I mean, I've got a group who mostly learned through 5th edition and are just used to the idea of let's just have a ranger in the party and let's just use their survival skills and let's just create food and let's just create water and rely on magic to do it all. And we can just hand wave all of that away. And the players themselves want to try and hand wave that away. They want to just get into the fighting, the gathering of loot and whatever.
That's fine though. Like the magic is there to also overcome obstacles, and let's not take that away. I mean, these are still things that are there. And yes, create magic and create water is there, for a reason. I mean, as a DM, if you want to then do what I do, is like you create water on the ground that soaks it up. Oh no.
I've done that before.
Yeah, I've had players stand with their water skins, like they were just like, all right, come on, and just while one gets a shower and the other one is standing there, just like.
There. If you want one about this, actually traveling, this is the book. This is the set to get from Free League.
I've heard a lot about Forbidden Lands, and yes, I've from what I've seen of their traveling rules, they're something that would fit that happy medium between having it impactful but without being overly crunchy.
Oh no. Don't get me wrong. It's like sexy spreadsheet tracking. But,
oh right, okay. Okay.
Well, I mean, because
is it easy for players to track it?
Well, you're tracking quarter of a days. Now that said,
Right.
You're checking quarter of a days and what everyone's doing and things like that. So, one adventure I heard is that they were actually talking about that the demons were not their biggest threat. It was the fact that their dwarf apparently went out into the woods to go collect like mushrooms, got hypothermia, and then they all nearly died on their way home.
I mean, yeah. It's down to like what you want. Again, I think a lot of this boils down to, at least from my perspective, is you as a DM, if you know what you want to incorporate in, just make sure that the players are at the very least on board with that. I mean, yes, I like my encumbrance this way. Yes, I love it when you've got environmental factors. I mean, I think like the last year on 4 different occasions tried to pitch to my Sunday group that they should take a game where they play in an Antarctic environment, just Alaska winter, tundra, harsh winter, tracking body heat, needing to go and set up camp, being unable to actually move at their full speed because of, you literally have, snow going all the way up to your knees, if not higher, and then having to fight in these conditions, you don't want to fight during that, and I would be rewarding them fully for avoiding conflict without ever drawing a sword, because those are dangerous. And my players turn around and go, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to survival links. That's not our interest. And then again, that's what the group just doesn't want. So there's no need for me to really sort of, try to turn around and say like, well, you're now playing this whether you want to or not. Because
I mean, I'm looking right now for what they have for the Wilderness Survival Guide. And to me, it just looks super cool for all this stuff, dealing with food, water, chasms. I mean, but I'll be honest, what it reminds me of is if anyone that's ever played Traveler or read the books, and just how details and like, well, how much do you really want to crunch in there? So,
yeah, it's down to.
But I mean, I still like the ideas that come into it, even if you don't throw everything in there.
Definitely.
Regarding traveling sort of rules, the rules in that are very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've used those in 5th edition, and
yeah,
my players liked it.
Yeah, it puts some emphasis on having a team of characters who can perform the roles that are necessary in terms of having a successful journey. And to me, if you want to break it down and not go through all the nitty gritty, I like the nitty gritty. But if you want to find that balance, I think that's a very good system to try. The one that's in there.
what we're, just like, yeah, I know that you talked about encumbrance. Encumbrance to me is great. I like simplified encumbrance. I don't want to track everything to the nearest gold piece.
The way I tend to do it is I leave my players to their own devices for a while, but they know I'm going to do spot checks occasionally.
Audits.
And
Carrying a cold?
There've been times I've sort of had taken a character sheet and gone, okay, you've got a strength of 8. You're wearing scale mail. You're carrying 3 spears. You've got 2 quivers. You've got a shield. You've got a big heavy weapon, and you've got all this food. How are you moving? And the player's like, okay, yeah, I'll get rid of some of that. I'll get rid of some of that. And okay, yeah, you just do that.
It's interesting that you mentioned like simplified encumbrance Omanal, because most of the systems I've seen for that, they just transfer the workload. They don't actually get rid of it. Most of them, you're having to do some sort of calculation or determination of what you're carrying. It's just, do you do it in actual poundage or coinage or whatever, or are you having to go through some convoluted mechanic of what's this the equivalency of? Actual weight is actual weight. So
it is, but I mean, there's a difference between carrying a refrigerator and carrying an anvil, even though they may weigh the same. So that's that. Whenever we talk about encumbrance, it's also volume on top of that versus just weight. But I think what I'm talking about is, and again, Forbidden Lands does a very good job. This weighs 1. This weighs 2. It's equal to twice your strength, and that's about it. That's what I mean by simplified.
How many of something equals another something is what I always get into in those systems. Yeah.
Well, there are times for it. There's a certain point where, just like for me, I look at it and say, all right, I want to do the common sense rule at a certain point. This gives you an idea of what you can carry, but once you go over that, you're cutting it pretty thin. And if I feel like you're trying to game the system, you're going to be punished. So it's like, and most players know when they're pushing the limit. I mean,
my main thing for wanting to do encumbrance isn't even so much about the weight. It's actually just knowing where everything is on a character. So when they fall in the river, I know who has a chance to lose what. It's like,
and certainly when I'm a player, so a lot of people like to just sort of think of their character as the hero dashing around with a sword or whatever. I like to try and picture my character with how they might look with items around their body, and I like to try and make it logical. And I go through that sort of mental picturing, that mental calculation of, okay, that's going to be in the backpack, that's going to be at my belt, and if I've got that at my belt, I can't put that at my belt as well, really, so that's going to have to be in the backpack. And I'll do those sort of things, but I know a lot of players don't think of it that sort of way. I like to have that sort of logic, and I like to have to say, I'll take the rope from my belt, because I've written on my character sheet, I know my rope's attached to the belt because there wouldn't be room in the backpack for it. I know it's on my character sheet, it's by my belt, so I'll actually say that I'll take the rope from my belt. And
there was a time where I used to draw my characters with everything they were carrying on them, or at least anything that would be showing, and that was my way of keeping encumbrance. It's like, all right, well, if and then I'd look when I got to the point at the picture, and I'd look at the picture and be like, all right, this is getting ridiculous. I knew I had to start shaving off items. Or hire some lackey to carry the rest of it.
I think there's, I think a lot of people as well don't have a really good perception of just how much things do weigh. If I was to say to you, pick up a 60-pound backpack containing 60 pounds worth of stuff and put it on your back, can you imagine to yourself quite how difficult that's going to be? Once it's on your back, you might be all right.
That's okay. But they also think swords weigh 50 pounds, but
yeah. I'm going to say, So a typical sword weighed what? 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds. Typical sword.
Like that's really light.
And some of them are a lot lighter than that.
And then they're balanced. So.
And they're balanced. Yeah. Like a long sword weighed less than a kilo, or weighed about 1.5, 2 pounds, an average longsword. That's how much they weigh because they were so well. They were so finely done.
Even two-handed swords were like normally 5 pounds or less because you have to
Yeah.
swing them at a certain speed, otherwise they're not effective. But the problem that I have with it is a Zweihander is still 6 feet long.
It's not really a dungeon weapon.
I mean, well, I think.
I mean, it could be if you're walking around in some big ass passages, but then again, trying to shoot your longbow in a dungeon passage might be tricky. It's like keep scraping on the ceiling,
Well, and I think that's the difference of when you're looking at inside and outside distances for range. Is you talk about players, and especially ones that come from D&D, and this is why I like having. How do I want to put it? This is where I like having the ones from Conan, where it's just done by zones. So your zone is really determined on how hard it is to hit from a certain distance. If you're fighting in a crowded tavern, your zones are going to be much smaller than if you're out in a big open field. But it's not a perfect 1-to-1 ratio, and there's a reason for that. It's similar, I think, in D&D. Range was technically feet in the dungeon, and it was yards, in the wilderness.
Face Rip called it wants its mechanic back.
It's what? Which one?
Face Rip called it wants its mechanic back. Because they had areas, and areas inside and outside were different sizes. So.
Well, but I'm okay with variables.
There's a reason I specifically mentioned the sum of £60 because my son had it's either birthday or Christmas present delivered today, and it was a set of dumbbells. And it's £60 worth of weights in this box, and the box isn't that big, but I'm thinking, I'm not a 7-stone weakling. I did quite a lot of physical activity over the last 10 years. I'm quite physically strong, certainly for my height and age.
That's 54 pounds right there.
Yeah,
and but if you take that same 60 pounds and put it on a frame pack, it's going to be easier to carry.
It's going to be easier to carry, but actually, the process of putting on that pack and standing up with that pack on isn't all that easy.
I think I know the dumbbell kit that you're talking about, and I'm too lazy to assemble them, so I just fucking swing the pack around like a kettlebell.
And speaking of which, I have to laugh because I have a very light mace, for working out, and it's 7 pounds, and people don't realize just how heavy that can be. And when you look at people swinging, you can break your wrist if you're not careful, and that's a lightweight. But the other part that it comes down to it was I remember when I went to Afghanistan, I had about 150 pounds of gear on me, so it was 30 pounds of body armor plus about 30 pounds of my backpack, and then I was carrying 2 duffel bags, and you're just like. Then they're like, okay, get off the plane. Now he wants you to walk 1.5 miles to get back on the same plane within an hour. And you're like, oh
yeah, but the big question for you and every other vet out there is, how are your knees doing these days?
Well, you know what? This, to be fair, I was almost 40 at the time when I did this, and there's a difference whenever you're going through it, but. It's also in distribution weight and everything else. It's because you can pull a muscle in your back just by lifting like the body armor, which for D&D doesn't seem like that much, but it's 25 pounds.
I'm 51. I can pull a muscle in my back by sneezing.
Yeah.
I've done it recently by getting out of bed.
I mean, the other day I just looked at my wife. I'm like, I've done nothing, but I can't move.
All
right.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, this is where the heroic comes into, is when you start coming over and you want the grumpy old, character. You just have to laugh because I've been sitting at my desk all day, and what it does is I twist my ankles at a certain point, and now I can't walk. Like, what if I just walk more, I'd be in better shape. Oh, I agree with you.
Talk about heroism. I mean, I fell backwards in my bathroom the other day, which is why I didn't get to game Monday. I slammed back first into my toilet in the sink, and I'm like, this shouldn't hurt as bad as it does. I'm like,
I will be 51 on Friday for the, and I will have a few beers before the Fighting Fantasy stream. So, anyhow, right. Moving on to the next, and I was going to bring this one up myself. The next rule that I like, and players often don't, and that is training rules.
Yeah.
I love them. I think they're brilliant. I don't use the multipliers for quality of play that Gygax puts in the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, but I do like my players to have to invest their hard-earned gold in gaining their levels, and it keeps them poor, which is good.
It keeps them motivated.
It's like fifth edition has no reason for gold anymore. That's the one thing that
No.
actually even a lot of the big fifth edition fans are like, why does this game have money in it? We can't do anything with it.
No, I mean my Curse of Strahd has not seen money. Like, well, they technically have money. They just have no idea how much because it's an NPC who looks after it, meaning I look after it, meaning I control their money situation, which is a dangerous thing to begin with. But
6 levels in my fifth edition party, I've been giving them reasonable treasure hoards for treasure hoards, not just the stuff you pick off of goblins. And the new player who came into the party at the 6th level mark, he's like, I'm so poor. He's like, why are you guys even adventuring? It's like, because I mean, and it's like they're at 6th level. One of them's refurbishing an old keep, and the other one's pouring all of her money into the family inn. And I'm like, okay, well, at least they're finding ways to spend it because
of training rules in my last AD&D game at 6th level, they were still working out which magic items to try and pawn in order to gain their levels, and that's the way I wanted it.
But you know what? I have mixed feelings on training rules. When I was a kid, I used to get so mad at them because it's like, why do I have to do this? I've already been out there and I've been doing this. But as I've been appreciating basic and advanced Dungeons and Dragons for the game design and why it was put in, it's intended to prevent players from jumping up levels very, very quickly. To give them some downtime, so you just don't go, oh, you know what? I just show up every week, and because I show up every week, then I just go up in levels super fast. And it's like, no. Especially, I might say when Gygax was doing 1-to-1 days. Oh, you went up a level? Guess what? That character can't play for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever it was. And then you're like, oh, okay.
But they also had multiple characters a lot of times too. So.
Yeah.
But that forced them to actually learn different characters and things like that. That's what I'm trying to say is, my friend is complaining right now about 5th edition on how fast they go up in level. And he's going, hold on, we're flying up there, and he says it's not that much more fun past a certain level. Whereas, like you're talking about with D&D, a lot of times it was a slow burn.
I actually really got tired of my brother's campaign from when I was in it for a while because due to my life, I would have to miss, couple of sessions, in a couple of, in a row. And I'd get back and I'll be like, all right, I just got these abilities. Now I got to level up and get new abilities because he was just like everybody leveled at the same rate. And yeah, so that level advancement was way too fast. I eventually just kind of lost interest because I'm like, I never get to like play with my character before I go up in level.
Exactly.
I think there's the other aspect of, I don't mind the, like we're talking about with rationing and exhaustion and everything else, is in 1st edition, the idea was once you probably got to about 7th level, at that point, that becomes almost trivial. And by the time you get up to 10th, but they had the spells equivalently for this, Lehman's tiny hut, and
Lehman's tiny hut. You know how you get around that? You have the monsters camp it.
Sure. Well,
dragons. It doesn't keep out dragon breath.
Well, and I in one of the camp when I think it was in 3.5. My players really leaned hard on that, and it doesn't help that I had misread the spell, so they were putting that thing up anywhere. Like they even saved themselves from going down a waterfall by Lehman's tiny hutting in the middle of the river so they could grab onto it. But when I finally figured it out, though, I had this thing called a necrolisk that's basically a basilisk, but instead of turning you to stone, it just kills you when it bites you. Park itself on top of their hut.
I'm not saying the monsters so much. I'm saying the environmental effects is like create food and water was a 3rd level spell.
Yeah.
It was intended that the players would be at these higher levels to make it quote trivial to do some of the. Yeah, I mean, they would still have to use resources, but now it pushed it further back that they don't have to. Whereas first edition just assumes that. So I mean, the equivalent of 7th level characters are almost the equivalent of 1st level characters now. So
Yeah. Well, and then of course, with the 1st level characters now having all of those wonderful resource breaking things like Goodberry and all of that fun stuff. So
well, but that's what I mean is it used to be that wasn't there for the
Yeah.
players, and they would have to get at a higher level. At which point, and to be fair, that was kind of the domain level game. Okay, now you can go further out more than trying to spend the night in an inn every night, or fearing for your death from every wandering monster. So,
but of course, at the same time, most campaigns petered out at 10th level anyways. So
that's true. And
nobody played beyond that. And if they did, it was a fluke.
On the other part, for the whole training, it also basically boils down to, well, these arguments I've gotten from players is, well, I've been out adventuring for 6 months. I should be a master swordsman. And I would turn around and say, no, you really shouldn't. Because being a master swordsman means you've got certain techniques. You basically put down the footwork. You understand how to do certain maneuvers. You know how to do disarming. These are the things. And these are things you learn by practice. These are not things you're going to be learning in the field, practicing against actual monsters that are trying to murder you. Ergo, you need to actually sit down with people who are specialized in these areas to progress yourself into the next point. It's the same thing that we have in our real life. You sit down, and I mean, if I'm being very critical about myself, like, yes, I love Excel, but I am not a guru on it. I'm basic if you look at how good you can use Excel, but compared to most people in my office who never really uses it, I'm just an absolute genius when it comes to these things, just because there is that difference in it.
I think things like fighting skills, though, you could make a reasonable argument that the general course of adventure is going to get you plenty of experience, practice, and unless you're going.
Yeah, but there's a thing
killed
between
150 orcs, 2 dragons, an owlbear, and 16 ghouls. I think I'm pretty good.
Yes, pretty good, but there's a difference between you being good, just going out and fighting your average monsters, and then you being great, where you then actually you have got the potential of actually being so renowned in your swordsman capabilities or your weapon capabilities that you are now pulling off feats that many people would spend months, if not years, trying to get it down to the T. At least that's my reasoning of it.
I think there is a bit of a simulationist approach to the training, in a sense that there is the assumption, as you say, you get experience in the field, but to really hone what you've learned, you need to sit down with somebody who has been there and done that and learn from them exactly how to put it into action. I mean, I will say, from my experience of martial arts, I did quite a lot of low-level judo tournaments, but I would never have really progressed without then sort of going down the judo club and spending time learning new techniques, new counters, new grips, new ways to deal with more experienced opponents. Yes, I could have stayed as an orange belt and go into easy orange belt tournaments all my life and win simply because I'm awkward because I faux left-handed from a right-handed grip, and orange belts aren't used to that. In fact, that's how I got my black belt, by beating brown belts, by confusing them with that. If I was to go to a black belt tournament, they'd all know that. They'd all think, hang on. He's gripping right-handed, but his balance isn't right-handed, and he's looking to go in left-handed, and they'd know how to counter it. So that's where learning new techniques from people who can teach you these new ideas comes in. And I think that the whole training thing, it tries to simulate that in some way.
True, but I'm pretty sure if you were living and dying by the gi there, you might get a little bit more experience.
I'm going to bring up something
without training.
I'm going to bring up something that we look at it. It's a way to keep them poor, but it's also a way to enforce downtime to slow the advancement. of
Yeah,
them
yeah.
as well. Which is
It's also something to do while somebody else in the party is healing. You know, you, you know, it's like the wizard's convalescing again. Might as well train. You know.
well, and I think that's the other aspect is you need a combination of the two. Is the problem that I had with it sometimes is, well, why can't I just make a 7th level character that's never left the monastery? For a month?
Honestly, I think you hit it on the head there, right? I think a lot of the problem in general with rules that people don't like is they want to pick at them as isolated cases and don't consider the holistic approach of what they're presenting. Encumbrance and survival and training and gold scarcity, whatever, that they all form this ecosystem of a game that supports itself. The downtime of slow healing, for example, which is a rule I have problems with. Nobody wants to sit there for a week healing. Goes hand in hand with all those other. There's a whole freaking Xanathar's Guide 5th edition that talks about all this cool stuff you can do in downtime. When do players ever get downtime in 5th edition if they're not doing anything? To give them downtime. So you have to have there's an ecosystem with all those rules, and if you just like any real ecosystem, if you start pulling stuff out, it doesn't make sense and it doesn't work and it seems convoluted or impractical or unsustainable.
So here's one that I pitched to 2 different groups, where one group outright rejected it, and the other group just went, "Oh hell yes, bring it!" And that is when I turned around and said, "Right, wizards, when you find a spell, you have to roll for how many days you spent trying to understand the arcane writing, because arcane writing is not a science, it's not mathematics. It is interpreted through the understanding of magic, meaning one person writes it one way, another wizard writes it another. So I have the wizards roll a d4 plus the spell level for how many days they need to sit down and just study that spell before they're allowed to roll their d100 to learn it, which is then something I keep a track of in my...
Speaking of spells, if you remember the old 1st edition, you didn't get a spell by going up a level. You got a spell by finding a spell book. And that's something I don't like about 2nd edition, because characters are like, well, you can pick 2 spells. All right, no, you should be, that was the way for the DM to force 2 things. One is they have to do spell research, which means they may be out of the game for months at a time. Or that meant as much as getting a magic item for a spellcaster. It's like, well, do you want the bracelet of defense, or do you want the spell book? And it's like, well, I want the spell book.
Well, yeah. I mean, a spell book is so valuable. I mean, it's the mage should be all about knowledge, and the spell book is a key to more knowledge, and knowledge is power, as they say.
No, spell books are so much fun, because I've had, I say that, both loving it but also having had some fun, not so fun experiences with it, primarily because you've got a book, it's going to have limited pages, and if you've got like a thick one, you're going to have to lob that around with you. If you're going to have like a small traveling one, let me give you an example here. Like a small traveling one where you've got everything sort of neatly packed in. This is going to be your ideal version. Well, then that's when you're going to have to take into account the amount of pages that you have and how many pages a spell takes up.
I just hire a book guy, like some 40k character, and just have it strapped to his back. So walking right in there.
Don't.
Falls in the river, he drowns, takes your spell book with him.
You go further. That's the joke from Knights of the Dinner Table. Like, you get the other characters to have your spells tattooed on their bodies. So if you end up in like prison together, or your spell book gets destroyed, at least you can just read their bodies. It's fine.
No. See, here's the problem I have, Ginger Beard, is back in the day they used to make books out of human leather, because it was so rare for book binding. I mean, if you look at try to imagine that, because we take paper for granted. But most of that stuff was written on what? Vellum or parchment?
But most of that's like
animal
skin. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're animal skin. So, we think of a book one way, but, you're like, no, everything was written big. It's not like our fine, fonts. It's like, oh, no, it's like someone did calligraphy. So all of a sudden you're like, like carrying a Conan board game with you when you have your spell book. It's like, okay.
I'm just going to reply to Christian Thatcher here. Oh, Gingerbeard, this is your partner in crime from the Call of Cthulhu game. This is Tariff.
Nice.
you were a great double act in that game, and Omanal, you were in that game as well. It was a
Now,
good combination of players. Good combination of players. But I do give XP for spell books because XP, as people have said, it is the gaining of knowledge. And I think spell books are certainly that they're all part of the whole adventuring experience and the knowledge gaining process.
I give XP. Go on.
I use the standard formula. I think it was a standard formula in one of the versions of D&D, where it's 100 XP per spell level in the book.
Yeah.
But it's divided amongst the whole party. I don't give. I don't follow the old procedure of if you keep the item that's worth 1,000 XP, you get those 1,000 XP. As far as I'm concerned, loot is shared. XP from loot is shared. That's how I do things.
Well, that also discourages the thief from stealing, gems and think, "Oh, I'm going to go
yes.
everybody else."
Yes. Yes.
See, I countered that by stating that it had to be acquired, newly acquired specifically, meaning stealing it from party members would not grant them any XP whatsoever because that was already acquired loot.
No. What I meant is that when they go in and they open up the box and they find a 5,000 gold piece gem and they put it in their pocket, I'm like, oh, I'm only getting the 5,000 XP. Now it's being shared amongst everybody, whether you stole it or not. Yeah.
I address that to the player because that's when I don't think that's when I think there's a lack of teamwork, and that's a people problem rather than a character problem, and I address that at the source.
I do by basically saying that all loot found during the adventure while adventuring is party loot, and only becomes personal once you get back to a safe place and you divide it all up. That's actually a rule that my players hummed and heard about. This is back on topic for the stream because a couple of my players were like about that, and I was like, no, I'm not going to have. I'm not going to spend my week preparing for a 4 or 5 hour game on a Friday night for you lot for it to descend into bickering because somebody's stealing from somebody else. We're not going to have that. So to get rid of any temptation of that happening, this is how we're going to play it. No, this is the way it's going to be. And after 3 or 4 sessions, they were like, okay, yeah, it works. It works.
Yeah.
I've been pretty lucky there. My players usually like whoever needs it the most or who can make the best use of it gets it.
Yeah, that's my view of it as well. It's not about whether.
That's something they learned. That's my group. Eventually, they bought into that idea. It was like, yeah.
I mean, right now, my wife's character still doesn't have a magic weapon. Well, she does, but she never uses it.
I think that group in particular, once that group in particular got into the mindset of just how lethal AD&D could be and how much it relied on teamwork, that's when they realised that, hang on, forcing us to work as a team is a good idea.
I should start giving her XP for sticking to her character concept, who is an axe fighter, and even though she's got a magic sword, she never uses it. Because she's like, I'm an axe fighter.
Down with that. It's like,
she would rather use her grandfather's hand axe than her magic sword.
You imagine the character, like, I get those situations. People are like, oh, but if you use this magic weapon, it's better. It's like, no, I just can't imagine my character using it.
Some of her earliest gold expenditure, going back to that, was to take the axe head of her grandfather's hand axe to the local smith, have it reworked and turned into a workable weapon so she could carry it with her on her adventures, just like her old granddad.
That's good.
But that's good character. Like,
exactly. Like I said, I should probably start giving her XP.
Yeah, no, I'd definitely give something for that. But I take it to the next step. A rule that I have that other players love, that they encourage me to do, is that I keep track of who has got mundane weapons from start to certain like milepoints throughout the game. So if a character has had the same sword from level 1 to level 5, well, that sword is now going to be imbued with magic because it's becoming a part of your legend. It is becoming magically enhanced because you are, as a character, as a person, you are developing a legend around you. You're becoming heroic. Ergo, it goes from being a mundane steel weapon to a magically enchanted, maybe even like +0 or +1 item, maybe a small enchantment to reflect your fighting style, and then it progresses as they go on. I mean, one of my players from my AD&D group basically mentioned like, "Oh yeah, my character's got a dragon tattoo," and I just went, I am going to imbue that thing with just magic, so he now has an additional spell slot in his arm, but it can only be spells correlating to draconic breath attacks. So gas, lightning, the whole thing. So he's spoiled for choice, but he's loving that, and he's now saying that he wants to study how he has gotten a magical tattoo because he doesn't understand how that came to be.
Might I suggest picking up some of the old Legend of the Five Rings books with their old tattoo monks?
Oh,
It's just some of the coolest stuff in there.
but here's the other thing that you're looking at is you've got Earthdawn and Rifts and all those games that do the similar things. Whether it's tattoos or imbuing weapons as you go through by threading them. I like those ideas. I really do. I wish D&D had done that more instead of trying to force yourself. I have to go to a magic user to have him enchant it. And I'm like, well,
there is a benefit for the whole like the magician enchants it because again it's an adventure. It's going out, it's doing
That's
this.
what DMs are for.
yeah, I know. I would have preferred, like you were talking about, is I hate saying this is okay. You got to mastercraft his weapon. The more that you do it, the better.
I used to give out non-magical mastercrafted weapons all the time as treasure. It's like that guy, that noble you just killed, he's got a sword. It counts as +1. It's just not magical. It won't help you with fighting creatures that require magic weapons or anything like that. But it's such a good blade that it's a +1. It was easier to do that in 3rd edition too, though, where +1 didn't mean dick. So
here's a rule that I thought about but never used, and the reason why, has anyone ever used this? Because it's in the 1st edition Dungeon Master's Guide about the level of the character affecting the amount of XP you get from monsters of certain levels.
That's how they do it in 3.5.
Yeah,
now,
that was always so hard to deal with. That's why I don't use it. So.
I would see its benefit in a system where you've got the bulk of the XP from fighting. But the reason I didn't use it in AD&D is 15-20% of XP comes from killing of monsters, and it's a lot of bookwork for a very small, in my opinion, benefit in terms of game mechanics.
Yeah, it's not economically, like time-wise, effort-wise.
Yeah, and totting up XP can, as a DM's task, is a fairly lengthy task if you're doing it by the book. So I didn't really want to make that take any longer. It's much easier in AD&D than it is in MERP, so I've streamlined it in there as well. But
on the topic of XP and magical items, I've tried, although to limited success, to do the whole thing of drink the magical potions and then the effects takes place. Although I've got different interpretations of that, but it's always been met with a mixture from different players, and some players have even sort of like looked at using, for example, AD&D and gone like, why can the dwarves not use these magical items? That makes no sense. We should all be able to use whatever magical item we pick up.
yeah, I'm very much of the old school there, when it's a case of this is a fighter only magic item. This is a magic item that can only be used by certain races and classes. I'll stick with that. I'm quite happy with that.
Mm.
Yeah, see, since the beginning, I've always had problems with some of the restrictions. I think I mentioned it in another stream. Like, I could never get my head around why wizards couldn't use swords. I'm like, because all the famous wizards use swords.
They can use them. They just can't become proficient with them.
Well,
Certainly in AD&D, it was just simply a wizard could pick up a sword and fight with it. He'd just get a -5 to hit.
well, you know what my view on that is you just go back to the old basic. Every weapon does the same amount of damage. It doesn't matter.
Now, I was going to bring that up actually, because I mean, DK mentioned in Discord that he'd never had a player whinge about any of his rules. I'm currently playing in his OD&D clone game, and I really dislike that rule about every weapon doing 1d6 damage. I like to have mechanical differences between the weapons. I like them to feel different.
Yeah, although I understand the logic behind it.
Did he say in Discord now he's whinged about his rules? I'm pretty sure
Yes.
I've drunkenly whinged at him about his rules on some Saturdays. Like,
Yeah, I'll
as far as
tag you.
he's running the system, so I'm going to let him run with the rules that he wants, because it's not affecting the game as far as, but it is one of these things that nags in my mind, saying, why does a dagger do 1d6? And why does a two-handed sword do 1d6? It's wrong.
You didn't know, but see, we're trying to look at it as actual damage rather than, are you trying to get an advantage? Because, okay, now I get in close to the sword. I don't mind it so much if there's a mechanical aspect of all single-handed weapons do a d6, and then all two-handed weapons do a 2d6, but you attack last in the round.
Yeah,
and then it's like that's kind of how I like it. Now that said, is every time I ever played a game, is what weapons did I have? I had a spear, I had a dagger, I had an axe, and then I had a hand axe, and then I had a sword. And it's like, well, why did you have all those? Because you need them all for different things.
Yeah,
yeah. I think the logic that was explained to me once on that was that the idea was that they're all going to kind of average out to doing the same lethality within a game turn. Just that reflective of the way that you fight with them was the logic behind the standard. All of them do a d6, because a dagger is going to do a d6 of damage through 1,000 little cuts, whereas a longsword is going to do a lot of dodge, parry, thrust, and eventually get a hit. And a two-handed sword is just going to break its way through and still do. And that was how it was explained to me. Is like, it's it's the average over taking into account their fighting style. Because you don't fight with a knife like you fight with a long sword.
Oh, of course not.
But you can kill somebody just as readily.
I can see some logic in that, but I do still love that old AD&D weapons table with all those different weapons.
Me too. I just don't saying I understood their logic.
Yeah. Certainly with regards to that game, my character throughout has used a hand axe as a weapon, and he's been offered all manner of guns and all sorts. But he won't use missile weapons. He's just got his trusty hand axe.
I have a hard time letting pole arms do just one kind of damage, especially things like halberds and stuff. Like, you've got like 3 different weapons on that thing.
Well,
4 if you count the weight on the end of the end of the stave, on the end of the pole.
I think we also have the advantage nowadays that we have YouTube, so we can see all the people use different weapons. But look at the poleaxe, which is not well represented in D&D, but the poleaxe was the weapon of choice among knights, not the shield. In D&D, every knight has a shield, but in reality, during the Renaissance era, almost none of them had a shield.
It also depends on what point in history you're talking about.
Well, here I'm just going to bring up Shadow and Son's comment here. And I'm going to utterly disagree with this. I think swords are completely overused in fantasy. I like the trying to bring a little bit of a semblance of reality to it, in that swords were generally useless against foes with decent armor. And that is a simple battlefield fact.
one
They
thing
were
I
great
love,
against armored foes, but against armor, they were generally pretty pathetic. And that's
mean,
why, as I say, why knights didn't use them so often in the battlefield. once
honestly,
armor
if you've
became
got
decent.
full-plated guys on the battlefield, they should be nearly invulnerable to just about anything.
apart from a Bector Corbin.
Yeah, or a couple other weapons here and there. But the fact of the
Yeah.
matter is that slashing weapons, they can kind of laugh those off all day.
But
Yeah,
the knights were the equivalent of tanks back in those days, especially if they had full plates.
I
and it was
actually
depend.
tried writing up a damage reduction or proofing system for 5th edition at one point, and I gave up because I realized nobody's ever going to die.
You
So
know what? I'm
that's-
going to bring this up because there's a little bit different. You may want to look at it because they did a little bit differently. They did what is it called? Eldritch Horror. Something. I have the PDF somewhere. But what was interesting is that almost all the armor classes were between 10 and 14. But the armor is what reduced damage.
Yeah, the soak or whatever it is.
Yeah. So it was. I mean, it used 5e rules basically, but they kept the armor at a much lower level. That was the thing I really hated about touch attacks for D&D is, well, you have to do armor class, and then you have to start recalculating things, and that's why I thought the big disadvantages of some of the systems in there is I would have rather them kept the armor class low and increased the amount that you could hit. Now I know Merc does that very well. Okay, you might be
I'm a fantasy. That's why I need another week break before we have our next Warhammer Fantasy session, just for the first combat to run, because you got different armor points on different body parts.
It's great. It was awesome.
Well, yeah, D&D had that at one point with the piecemeal armor system that came out in Oriental Adventures.
Yep.
We pulled that into regular games because my players were always wanting to have armor like the guys on the covers of the fantasy novels. I've got an armored sleeve and then some hip plates and nothing else. I don't know why, but exactly, War Duke.
I don't mind those, but those are things I think I think a lot of us are. I think that's why a lot of us went over I like to play this or I like to play that, but I know we were arguing about this a little bit earlier, Elfbait, but
sorry.
The funny thing is, I think we're actually coming from the same area. We're just we're being pedantic in some cases.
Never.
No, not us. We will not argue for the most minor thing, even though we agree. No, anyway, but the whole point was, talking about is, we're kind of whores when it comes to games. We'll play anything, anywhere, at any time.
Prefer the term sex worker for games, politically correct.
I'm sorry. I'll say slut because I won't take money for it. But
I will. I got no shame.
But the whole thing is,
I've been a professional DM who earned money for it at a shop. I am a gaming whore.
Oh, okay. You know what? I can respect a real professional.
This channel. Not a lot of money, but I'm earning money from this channel.
Hey, Elfbait, I can respect a real professional. So anyway. But no, I think that's why a lot of us gravitate towards other systems, because one system would break down and then another system would break down. Well, what do I really want for this or that? I know we're all talking about things that I like versus that players don't. Milestone versus individual XP, and it really depends on the group and the players. Talking about, I know we've been talking about that as well. Everyone should have their own XP. Well, okay, now you just create more work for me as the DM. However, the flip side is I also expect all the players to contribute, and if you're not, then we'll have to go to individual XP. So I think there's that aspect too.
One thing, I mean, on the whole general topic of rules that you like to play with that nobody does, back in the day, my players, the guys I grew up gaming with and played with, I could get anything past those guys. I mean, they would. I mean, not past them. I'm like I'm trying to sneak it. They were really open to playing with new options. We'd play an AD&D or whatever conglomeration of BX and AD&D that passed for D&D back then. And if you wanted to throw something in from a dragon, or just something that you woke up in the middle of the night and scribbled on a cereal box, they were cool with it. And I didn't get a lot of pushback. It was, I think there was, I don't know if it's just as we got older, or gamers changed, or just the circles I was with. The circles I was with, also everybody played a lot of different games, so I think they were maybe more open to different mechanics.
I just want to a little bit of back and forth going on in chat at the moment between Saturnine and L. In the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, there's a little bit, an often overlooked bit in the section on awarding experience points, where the idea is that the XP award for certain things is divided by the character level, so it is reduced. Thus, a level of threat is calculated into it, and I think that's what Saturnine is referring to, which is basically basing the award on the actual level of threat posed by the encounter. So you get, if you're high level and you got it from low level foes, then it would be the amount of XP you'd get would be reduced, and that includes all XP for monsters, for treasure and all that sort of stuff, which really slows down leveling at mid and high levels. And that's the bit that Saturnine's referring to here. It's not a rule that I've used. I understand the reasoning behind it, but for me, the general pace of whether I left it as 1-for-1 for XP going through the levels, because leveling slowed down anyway. Things just got very lethal. Parties were reduced to a lot of hit and run tactics where they were achieving less because what they were fighting was just so exponentially more difficult. So I don't use it, but I can see why some people do.
I thought that was a 3-5 thing, that it was really based off of your threat level for that you know.
It was in the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide.
Okay.
But it's overlooked by a lot of people.
And to be fair on that, is I don't think they did they didn't do that for the treasure, did they?
It's not in. I mean, I've read that bit a few times, and it's typical Gygax rules in that it's not entirely clear. You have to sort of read it, reread it, and reread it, and go, oh, that's what he's getting at. And I think he's intending it for everything, but I didn't use it. As I say, it is the bookkeeping that comes from it, and as Al says, a mixture of levels. Yes, the idea would be that the 3rd level wizard would gain more XP than the 7th level thief for the same encounter, but it just takes the calculations to a frustratingly more fiddly level for little gain in terms of gameplay, in my opinion. Anyhow, that's taken us slightly off topic, but hopefully that's clarified. That's clarified that. Anyhow,
we kind of cut across interesting point from Elfbait. Sorry, I was actually just ruminating on what he said.
Like, okay, go back to it.
Yeah, not just about how, you know, yeah, I can agree. Me too. Like playing as friends when I was younger, like just fucking take on board new rules and whatever. And yeah, why is it?
You might even steal them from a completely different game.
Yeah,
you know, like, hey, I like we used to pick up Palladium books all the time, and they were sort of D&D. And
hey guys, the dragon should do mega damage. What is mega damage? I don't fucking know. It's Palladium. I don't understand it.
Well, you know what? I'm looking at this right now when you're talking about the XP there, and it says for gold pieces, it's not that you get less for the characters. It's only whenever you're fighting a monster less than you that you should be adjusting it. That's all I'm reading from it. But it says it's completely subjective. So,
yes, it is subjective. Yes.
It is. As soon as you use the word subjective, it's just, hey, this is an idea. Play with it as you will, but we're not going to flesh it out.
Yeah.
Whereas I think 3.5 really did it where if you were above a certain level of the monster, you got 0 XP for fighting.
3.5 should have come packaged with your own complimentary Saxius. Saxius not included.
Just just open the book and I start crying. Oh, let me tell you about Excel. Come on.
It's like the
Well, I mean,
it's like the Ring with more beard.
I remember that the original 3.0 rule books did come with a CD-ROM. So
Yes,
It
yes,
can
they
be
did.
just on the CD.
I actually did get a printout where you would then have party level monster hit dice and the progressiveness of how the XP was meant to be calculated, so that you could put all of that into an Excel sheet and then cross calculate the entire thing. All you had to do was put the monsters in.
I mean, I'm not, this is where I liked Palladium XP for this. And I think this is where you talk about threat level, which they've kind of gotten away from. And it really didn't matter as much in first edition because the monsters generally weren't the way that you got your XP. It was all the gold that you got from them. You know, all the dragon's worth 20,000 XP, but his treasure hoard's worth like 400. So, it's.
I did have a little bit of an experiment. I did go through a number of old AD&D modules, totaling up the XP in them, and to work out the general balance of XP, how much is available, how much gold is available, and it was a bit of an eye opener. I mean, looking at something like the village of Homlet, not including Homlet itself, because I know a lot of people did raid all the houses in Homlet, but in the actual dungeon, there is, if you completely loot that dungeon, you will have about enough XP and gold for the suggested maximum party size of about level 10 to gain a level and train. Now the likelihood of 10 characters getting through that adventure and all surviving is minuscule, but there is something like 25,000 gold pieces in there, rough, give or take a few. And 10 characters training are going to need 15,000 just to gain their levels. So that has been put into place in the adventure, whereby if the party is successful and thorough, the suggested party size have got enough to go up that level. But the balance of loot, I mean, there's about 25,000 XP in there for loot, and there's probably about 3,000 for monsters in total, roughly. So it just shows you the various the balance as to how things were designed. And when I say loot, I mean magic items as well.
Yeah. Well, and you were supposed to get a certain amount. What is it? A plus one sword might be 1,000 XP or something. So I mean, that was a big jump for some of it.
It was about 300 or 500 for most plus one weapons. The most valuable item for XP in there, I believe, was the Staff of Striking at the end.
Isn't there like a Ring of Protection? I mean, but a lot
Ring
of
of
them
Protection is
are
worth a fair bit as well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you start getting these, they actually mean something. And like you said, okay, how do we go up in level? But it also, and I always assumed that the idea was if you played the module, you're supposed to go up about one level per module or half a level. That's that, and I don't think that's unreasonable for it. But then, of course, man, you talk about all the stuff in D&D, like you were talking about, 15,000 gold. That just hoovers away all your money like nothing. So,
because what party is going to get every single last gold piece from that dungeon? Because the dungeon is dangerous. And what's more likely to happen is 4 or 5 characters will survive, having got a portion of it, and they'll end up pretty rich. And they'll probably have enough to gain 2 levels if the DM is going to allow that. I know the rules say you shouldn't.
Well, I have had, because I encouraged it, a group of players who went on a full-scale expedition to a nearby dungeon with the full intent, coming in there with 30 so hirelings, with the idea of excavating, fighting, securing, analyzing, evaluating, loading up the mules, all just so they could clear out 1 layer, maybe 2 layers, and then head back and then come back for more. And
the archaeological approach to dungeon delving.
Exactly. But I encouraged it because I actually went through the entire steps with the group, and they just went, for one of the few times I've presented wacky ideas like this, my group actually went, archaeological discovery? Yeah, no, we'll go for that. And when they learned that, there are actually ruins of like an entire town that other people haven't claimed, the idea suddenly went away from archaeological to let's just restore it and put a crown on our heads.
Yeah, yeah.
We just
why
need the fund. We just need the funding from the old king's treasury, and we just need to unbury it.
There's a thieves guild started by some of the high level thieves in one of the campaigns, and when I was a kid, and that's what they did. They went and cleared a dungeon, and they're like, "All the treasure's already here. All we need to do is just reseal the entrance and have all the thieves come in." And then they hired my barbarian to protect the gate. My old AD&D barbarian.
I see some mentions about the pace of leveling. In AD&D, first to second level, I found on average you're looking at about four sessions. A typical low level module will give you enough XP and gold to go from level 1 to level 2, and anywhere between 3 and 5 sessions, depending on the adventure, depending on how thorough they are. I ran that campaign for, I think it was the best part of 3 years. And in those 3 years, my party went from level 1 to level 5, probably in the first 6 to 8 months of play. But by the end of those 3 years, the highest level character in that party was level 12. And this is playing about 5 hours every Friday night, every week, and playing official adventures, which are notoriously, they contain quite a lot of gold and treasure. So that rate of, certainly from level 6 plus, that slow rate, but they were doing often 2 or 3 modules to go from level 6 to level 7, and another 2 or 3 modules go from level 7 to level 8, and each module taking a month and a half to get through. That felt fine. That felt a suitable leveling. That's the sort of leveling rate I'm happy with.
I was listening to, and this is the thing that we forget about. Is if you actually look at it, we always talk about levels of monsters. If you notice in the Dungeon Master's Guide, it talks about the levels of the dungeon, which are completely separate.
Yes.
So, and which makes sense. That's the problem going back and rereading the rules and having listened to people more about the game design. Was it makes sense when everyone's going to the same dungeon over and over again. Okay, the thief can't pick this lock until they advance a level. Yes, but there were other parties going through that same dungeon, so at some point that lock got picked, so they could move through. So there's things like that. But I agree with you. It's how fast the players go and how fast you want to move them through. I like to be fair, I hate going first and second level characters, though I think it's necessary for very junior players to understand, to get tactics down where tactics matter more than your level. But experienced players, like, okay, third level is probably a better way to start because you don't instantly die from a sneeze,
And we often started our campaigns at roughly 6th level.
I'm just going to put my fingers in my ears and pretend I haven't heard any of this because I'm a stickler for starting characters at level 1.
That's all well and good, but at a certain point, you don't care. And like if the rest of the players don't care about that and they just want to start somewhere along the line. And actually, when I say somewhere around 6th level, because what we would do is we would determine an XP level that you would start at, so you'd still have a variety of levels in the party. All right, we're going to start at 7,000 XP.
Well, I imposed the idea of having your own little stable of characters, and it was up to the players to have 3 or 4 characters that they were developing, and if one died, they'd use a different one.
Oh, this isn't for replacement characters. This is just starting new campaigns. Like, hey, we have this cool idea.
I always started campaigns at level 1, always at level 1.
I don't mind it one way or the other. It's just if you've been through first or second level that many times, you pretty much understand those spells and how to do the tactics and everything else. And that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, I'm about to make Geek's ears bleed again, too, because a lot of times we did it was because of stories. So, because we would want to start a campaign. We're like, wouldn't it be cool if we did that thing where we're all a bunch of professional mercenaries who've been fighting a while, and now they've broken away from the regiment and they're on the run, and like a first level character didn't make sense. So.
Well, see, that's why I felt the third level character would make more sense.
Excuse me.
For that. Oh no.
Continue talking.
Let's not forget while we're talking about this is
La 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 la.
this was
La,
a great
la,
thing
la, la,
about Dark Sun, where all of your stats were a lot higher and you all started at 3rd level, but you had no armor.
Yeah, but Dark Sun was like that.
Well, you
Anyway,
had, yeah,
so let's actually go into reverse this around, because Dark Sun is just one of those settings where it had rules where it almost encouraged of like the fact that you survived on the session, and that should be the reward in itself. That's where I almost drew the line of like where I found that the rules or the sorry, to bring it back on topic about rules that we like and that isn't accepted. When the rules doesn't bring a form of reward, like enhancement to the game, when it starts being focused more around like, oh, it's making it tough for the sake of making it tough. That's not the interest for me. It's because it's meant to be focusing or highlighting very specific aspects of a game, for example. And Dark Sun is just one of those games where I just saw so much pressure on starvation or dehydration and not being exposed to the elements that it just completely lost my interest as a setting, because of how painstakingly gritty it made itself.
I played one campaign of Dark Sun, and we played it using 13 age rules, 13th age, which is based. It's a more palatable version of 4th edition. 4th edition without the over emphasis on strategy, and there's a lot more role play elements in there. It's still not perfect. It's still a bit too heroic for my my liking, but it fitted Dark Sun. And that we started at 1st level, but we were okay to start at 1st level because the characters were tougher. And I enjoyed that campaign. It was fairly short. It was something different. I found it quite refreshing. And it's, I say, 13th Age is definitely, it's a lot better than, it's what 4th edition should have been if they wanted to have that sort of game. And it worked with Dark Sun. I'm not saying I would go back and do it all over again, but at that time, I enjoyed it.
I'm going to bring up why I liked Dark Sun for that. Was there was some of that greenness, but it's not so that you had to go out of there. But what I liked about it was now I could give players steel weapons, and those were good as magical weapons. I could give you steel equipment. And what it did is, you have to realize, I had just come off from I didn't just come off, but I came from a Montreal campaign where I completely overdid it by using all the UA rules and bending all sorts of crap. And I said, this is, it brought the greenness down to a much lower level where I'm like, you know what? That steel dagger means a hell of a lot because it doesn't break every time you go into combat or something. And that's part of the reason I liked it. But it's, to be fair, I also liked it. And Elfbait knows this, Crash and Volturnus and a lot of these others where I like that survival aspect and players are required to think more. And if your armor class is only a 5, you probably don't want to get into a fight that often. So that was
no.
If you had a 19 dexterity, it was things like that I liked about the Dark. So,
and again, at L here, I recently ran UK4 module When a Star Falls, which is it's got quite a solid story. So, and it is quite linear in the way it plays, but there is one encounter at the end, and it really pulls no punches. The idea is that the party have traded with a group of deep gnomes, and the deep gnomes have betrayed the party and set their lair to basically self-destruct. And the self-destruction, the rumbling it causes, attracts 2 red dragons to the scene. And okay, they're not big red dragons. they're not old red dragons. They're both fairly young red dragons. But it's an adventure that's for an average party level of level 4, and there's 2 of them. That's not a fair fight. Not by any stretch of the imagination. And that encounter forces the players to really, really think. And I've never, ever had a party confront those dragons in a straight fight because the players have been sensible. They've sacrificed their horses, usually. They've hidden. I mean, one party, they sacrificed the horses, and we're like, hopefully the dragons will pick up the horses and they'll slip away while the horses are being hunted down for food. So it's not all sort of illogical menageries with lots of different creatures. I mean, it's a bit of a kick in the teeth encounter, but it is a logical encounter. It's never going to be a straight fight. It's not a balanced encounter by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
And really, should encounters be that balanced? I think that's part of the problem that we have now with 5e. I'm not saying that player you want to give something that completely crushes the character, but I mean, look at U3. If you did that on a challenge rating, that would so blow anything in modern 5e. But you said it was just about perfectly for it. So
doesn't matter. 5e's challenge rating is all busted anyways. My current party is surviving deadly encounters on average.
Yep. You can do
It's
do
ridiculous.
that.
I mean, to even threaten them, I have to pump it up to dangerous or deadly.
It's
And
funny.
okay, go ahead.
Sorry, man. I was going to say it's funny you mentioned like when we're talking about encumbrance and where stuff is from falling in a river, because our 5e game, the greatest killer of player characters was drowning in water sources.
Yeah, one of my favorite environmental things in 5e was when I was doing my tropical island campaign, and they kept getting everything from jungle rot to ants in their armor, and prickly heat from wearing your plate mail in the sweaty jungle.
Yep.
They're like, we want to take a short rest. I'm like, you can't. Why? Mosquitoes. You just can't get comfortable. Want to do a long rest, but where? You're in the middle of the jungle. Everything wants to bite or poison you.
I'm gonna you sort of just responding to a comment, but sort of going back to encumbrance and items, whatever, and back onto the topic of what we're meant to be talking about, which is rules that you use that players don't like. Damaging party items.
Yes.
Damage.
Yes.
Players absolutely hate it, usually.
Don't care. I don't give them a choice.
No, I don't give them a choice either. The party had a Juggernaut Cavalier, and when the Zeg-Yi and Zeg-Yar exploded at the end of S4, Lost Caverns of Sojkamp, in a massive blast of energy, he was left with his armor blasted off his body. His prized full plate armor that he'd kept polished and shiny throughout his adventuring career was torn away. Half of the loot in that room was blown up. And that's all. I like that sort of thing. I like that sort of rule, and I will use it.
In my nautical campaign, insisted on wearing chainmail in a seagoing campaign. I'm like, the minute you go overboard, you're gonna have to shed that armor real quick.
Yeah.
And this is why the bard always had bagpipes.
Flotation device.
Aren't there actual stories of where that actually happens, where the guy with the bagpipes gets knocked off of the bridge, and that's what saves his life?
I imagine.
I mean, I think that's actual like Celtic or Scottish stories. I mean, I'm not
as actual as those can be.
Having flashbacks to like school swimming lessons now.
Talked to a salmon and ate it, and now I'm cool.
Well,
school swimming lessons. It's like, if Yeah, no, crash landing in water. You got to take like your shirt off and tie the arms, and then like try and get the air in. It's like an airbag.
I imagine the bagpipe stories are real because people have known for a long time animal bladders, fill with air, and so it's like that's ancient peoples aren't stupid as much as the Discovery Channel might want to make you think they were.
I'm just trying to imagine a Scotsman falling in the river, floating out the river on his bagpipes, and then trying to play the bagpipes afterwards, and the noise they would make. It would be this gurgling, wet, farty sound. I'd imagine.
Now I just want to have a cleric who's got bagpipes for his religion, and then goes into a dungeon and fills his bagpipes with holy water and just uses it as a hose. He's like, the undead are here. As it burbles and farts out into the dungeon, occasionally a squeak of a dead rat.
I'm trying to think of rules as critical damage rules, which I love. Once you start getting past a certain point, characters that hate having limbs removed, or like you said, it's funny. You can kill a character and they're okay with that more than they are if you take out an eye.
That's again like with the Warhammer Fantasy stuff. Like, there's every likelihood in the first combat that one of the player characters will probably lose a limb or an eye or something.
Yes,
I'm looking forward to my character getting a new nickname of some sort.
If you want some gnarly 5th edition damage rules, pick up Iskloft, the one Viking 5th edition the game that somebody did. Yeah. Like every critical hit they've got a massive critical system, and then they've got the like crushing blows and lingering injuries and stuff like that. They also have active shields in there, like your shield actually does something. So,
I mean, if my character ends up being Jaw Four Fingers or Jaw the Blind or Jaw the Toothless or whatever, that'd be great.
Man, you're a Tomb Raider. Being blind is probably not good for your occupation.
Well,
you can change occupation, can't you?
Yeah, retrain as a piano tuner or something.
What is the? I mean, come on. We've all looked at it. How cool is it with the guy with one eye? With the eye patch over it. Or let's also talk about anyone that what was it? What was it? Thor hired whatever the guy was in Game of Thrones, where he had half a hand because he lost a few fingers. There are great stories that come from these permanent wounds. And yet we're so afraid to do it because my character has to be always like idolically perfect. So yeah. Oh,
yeah, we had that discussion. At a certain point, though, the character just becomes unplayable, and you're just like, why am I bothering?
But I'm okay with that at a certain point, because then he goes over to the NPC side, and then you have that recurring aspect of, you go up to the bartender and he's missing a leg, half a hand, and he has one eye. And he's like, I wouldn't recommend that you go in that dungeon unless you're properly prepared. You're like,
you and I are in agreement that it's fun to play. I would imagine, though, we're probably in the minority.
I'm trying to remember. There is some fantasy comedy short story.
Well, you're here for a reason, Saxius.
I'm trying to remember. There is some fantasy comedy short story. It might even be by Michael Moorcock himself. That is a parody of like Michael Moorcock's heroes who all have these like, I've got a disability, but I've replaced it with like the eye of a god. So it's this hero who's done all these battles and he's replaced so many body parts with like different like, I've got the gnarled root leg of this kind of tree god who keeps chasing me. But anyway, it ends with him. He's down to like have sex with a woman, and it turns out that his like penis has been replaced with like a sandstone penis of a god.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, then all the Vecna parts are really the earliest instances of accessibility in D&D.
That's what I was thinking, because like 5e, they're like, well, you can have the combat wheelchair, but like old school players, like I've read Moorcock, you're just meant to replace him with like god parts. Like,
so I have to say, when I read that they had done the wheelchair accessible dungeon. Like it or hate it, whatever you think about it. My first thought was, if I'm going into a dungeon and there's ramps everywhere, I'm terrified. What's going to come rolling down those things? You know, like I've seen the Juggernaut in those AD&D modules in the old. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
if there are ramps here, they're in my mind, they're here for a reason.
You know what? Oh, you're right. Especially if, you know, in the old Greyhawk where there was some science stuff. So you had the tracked, you know, robots that would be going through there.
Well, beyond that, I mean, Tomb of Annihilation has some roly death machine. Oh, not Tomb of Annihilation. Well, Tomb of Annihilation probably has it because
Tomb of
Tomb
Horrors
of
has
Horrors had it. So, and
Yeah.
Tomb of Annihilation is the playable version of Tomb of Horrors. But
I would argue Tomb of Horrors is perfectly
no,
playable.
don't. That was tongue firmly in the cheek there, because Tomb of Horrors is playable. You just don't play it as part of your campaign, whereas Tomb of Annihilation is playable as part of your campaign. But also, isn't there like a BX module that it's some desert module, I think, that has a giant juggernaut or something like that.
Master of the Desert Nomads.
Yeah, those are the things that I would be worried about coming down the hallway at me if I was in a dungeon full of ramps.
Well, you know what's funny is if you look at a lot of places, a perfect example is the Great Pyramid.
They're all ramps.
It is all ramps. It's you know, well, if you really want to have fun with the players, is then you just slick it up. So now they have problems climbing up the ramps.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say.
They're
Like,
greased. They all like super fun, happy slide their way down, but then they can't get back up.
It's a one-way trip, guys. Have fun.
All right, Mage's Musings.
Yes.
You know, that's where I go for the 0 hit points are not always death.
Yeah.
You know,
that's something I was going to mention. I was running a 2nd edition campaign a little while ago, and with these characters, I began with a little intro scenario where they played the Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh, because that group hadn't played that adventure, and I had it as a little precursor sort of adventure, and the party lost. If you know the adventure, towards the end, you've got to board a boat and try and take on the smugglers who are on the boat. And as they were floating silently in the rowing boat towards the boat, they hadn't been spotted. The party's bard chose that moment to stand up and sing a rousing song to give the party confidence for the battle ahead. At which point, the enemy smuggler's boat just lifted its anchor and sailed away.
Oh,
Bye-bye. We've been
Weird
discovered.
player decisions.
Bye-bye. We've been discovered. We're off. So I used that, and I dropped. My 2nd edition campaign was based on the party being refugees from a cataclysm, and I thought, now how can I bring in that previous one? Okay, that group of smugglers will have used that smuggling boat to escape from the cataclysm as well, and they've made the same voyage, and they will have a little encampment a fair way up the coast, where they've got their own little village where they've set up, and they probably had to break down the boat in order to build the huts and whatever, or whatever. But this is meant to be a year or two down the line. They've rebuilt the boat, and now those smugglers are acting as pirates up and down the coast to nick stuff, and that's how they come back into contact with the player characters. Now, my player characters decided to rush that smuggler camp, and they lost. Two characters got killed, and one got knocked down to 0 hit points and got abandoned by the one survivor who ran away. And so that player started creating a new character. And after about 3 or 4 months, he came to me, "This John, I'm really not feeling my new character. I missed a bit out. Sorry. The party sort of regrouped new characters, but they got a load of militiamen to come and help them. And with the added reinforcements and having healed beforehand and a bit of preparation, they were then able to take out the remaining pirates. And they rescued that character who was on 0 hit points, who'd been kept prisoner. But I said to him, look, you've been mistreated. Your spirit and your body is badly broken. He's going to have to retire.
Mhm.
I kept him alive. He'll stay as an NPC. Now, just before he'd gone on that expedition, he'd become the first character to get married. So him and his wife, his new wife, were looking forward to a life of wedded bliss. So he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to retire. I'm going to go back to my wife, and she's going to try and nurse me back to health."
2 weeks from retirement.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. So, but I say 3 or 4 months down the line, the player was like, "I'm really not feeling this new character at all. Is there any chance I can get my old friar back to some adventuring ways?" And I was like, "Okay." And this is so I'd used he'd been captured. His body had been broken. He was badly injured, lasting injuries, spine damage, all that sort of stuff. And so I wrote it into the campaign that he was and I thought I was going to introduce almost like a godly avatar as like a quest provider into the campaign. And this would be a polymorphed polymorphed gold dragon in the form of a beautiful woman who was an avatar from one of the gods of the land. And he'd been, up until his injuries, he'd been a very pious man. So he'd earned some degree of divine help I thought, because of his actions. So I thought, okay. So in the middle of the night, the relatively newlywed couple were woken by this gorgeous figure coming into their bedroom, and she walked across the room, and in front of his new wife, this beautiful polymorphed red dragon leant over the crippled cleric and planted a kiss on him. The next 30 minutes of that gaming session was his wife ranting at him, saying, "Who's this woman? Have you been having an affair?" I just used it as an opportunity, but it brought the character back. I said that her kiss heals him. It brings him back. But in that way, I've used lingering wounds, lingering damage, capture, all these things that players are supposed to hate. But the final result was one that made for a satisfying return of a character.
I used capture to restart a campaign. I had my nautical campaign. Most of my players had gone away because they were all kids. It originally started for my kids, and so I wanted to keep it going because my wife really liked her character. So I'm like, all right, well, and my nephew was also playing, and he's like, I want to keep playing. So they all woke up in a rowboat without their stuff being. It was sort of like, think of it like the sail barge thing from Return of the Jedi, where somebody's addressing them from the side of this big pirate ship that is next to them, giving them their adventure that they have to kick off with. They're like, "See that island over there? You need to go to that island and get us the thing, or we'll kill you." They're like, "Well, we can't do that without our stuff." They're like, "It's on the beach." So I didn't take their stuff, but I'm like, you have to get off the island to even kick off the campaign. So.
One of my favorite AD&D modules begins with the party having been captured, and they're captured at the end of one of my least favorite AD&D modules. It's done in such a very clumsy, railroady, horrible way.
A3.
Exactly. A3 is terrible. It's an awful adventure. And the ending is so poor. But A4, the module afterwards, where they start off as prisoners, is fantastic. It's a brilliant adventure. It's just the way it has to start by them being prisoners without any of their stuff. And all they're wearing is a loincloth. They've got no light, nothing else. And these are 5th, 6th level characters.
That makes a huge difference when you look at A4. Well, I mean, to be fair, by the time you're getting to that, you might be 6th or 7th level. I mean, I know it says 4th and 7th, but it depends.
Yeah, you'll be 6th or 7th. See you, Chili. See you, Squirrel. He's talking about going out to enjoy some chili. Yeah.
But
chili.
This was one of the reasons speaking of things you like to do as a DM, is limiting what races players can be, because I want them to eventually have that ability. to go through an A4 module, and if you're playing a Warforge or a Lizard Man, it makes some of these things trivial. And so players hate it when you say, no, you can play anything except you can play your basic core races. No Drow, no Dragonborn, no Tiefling. And you put, no, and they're like, but it's like, no, this is, otherwise I won't be DM. And they're like, because most of them don't want to be DMs either. So, yeah.
That's a nice tie. It's not strictly a rule, but something I was thinking of for this topic. Like rules you like, but your players do not. Fucking fantasy racism, right? No, because I've always wanted to run like a 2E Ravenloft campaign, but if you're not human, and you go into like any place in Ravenloft bar a few special domains, you're gonna be treated like absolute shit.
Yes.
But
yes.
You kind of the players will want to play like elves or whatever, and you feel yourself pulling back on that just because you don't want to just constantly spend the whole session going the villagers throw pig shit at you.
Want to run a human only campaign though? Try doing it as humans as other races, not in the racist kind of way, but well, I guess it is marginally kind of racist, I guess. in the old kind of Conan way, where different nations have different characteristics to them. I mean, I did that even with a campaign where I've never got a chance to run it because nobody wants to play all humans. I'm like, but you're not all the same. Basically, giving national identities as part of the character background.
Merc does that. Merc does that.
And mine is like a Renaissance Europe kind of a setting, and you've got kind of this empire that's a mashup of Italian and French and Spanish influences with a little bit of English Civil War era smattered in, and everybody's like, oh, it's all humans. I'm like, okay, well, you could also play an orc. Because that fits into the campaign world, but it's it's really hard to get people to flex. Or if you just want to do that old school fantasy where elves are rare and they're kind of out there in the woods and they're spooky, and dwarves are rare. When you see a dwarf, you're like, holy crap, it's a dwarf. The hell are you doing out of your rock?
I'm going to bring this up as the other problem that you have, which is Saxius mentioned about, well, you won't play these non-humans. I had a DM that always sucked us into Ravenloft. Didn't matter what we played. We could be playing somewhere and we'd always be sucked in there. Well, the problem was that we decided to play Thief Acrobat Halflings. I hate telling you, if you want to get people that completely destroy the feel of Ravenloft, is non-greedy Thief Acrobat Halflings. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to at least address, because I've started I've been running now for almost a year, a Curse of Strahd game where I've thrown players who are pretty new to Ravenloft into Ravenloft, and I decided that I am not gonna put strong emphasis on the racism part of it's 5th edition, so you've got Dragonborn and all the other sort of sub things. What I do put a lot of emphasis on is the fact of you are outsiders. You are not from this village. So it's less about, what they were born as and more about the fact that you were not born behind these walls. Therefore, you are a potential enemy. And that was something that the players had to struggle with on many occasions. And they had to prove themselves several times to several different villages that they could be trusted in order for them to do that. But in Ravenloft, it's a very inherent thing. But it's just down to whether or not you then want to have that in, or if the group is the right audience for that sort of thing. And you learn that as you go along with these things.
I think it's important for people to remember that when they're running these games, that they're stories and everything is kind of fictional.
I know, but in this case, I think I could. It's just one of those cases where I would tell people oh, okay. I was just okay. Well, I'm not going to go into that aspect of it, but I can take it from the other aspect, so you are still given the proper
Yeah, it's like playing
experience.
Cthulhu in the 20s in America. You're like,
Yeah.
"Ugh."
Yeah,
my wife's playing her character is a woman, and I'm like, technically the rest of the party could go to jail for transporting you across state lines.
Well, you know what though is we all look at that, and then there's so many things where it's different. Of it's I don't know. There's anyway.
You don't play
guess
with
talking
that,
about-
is what I'm saying. You kind of sidestep it around, and
yeah.
Yeah.
That's-
Well,
if you
like-
do run into somebody who's a racist or sexist, it's more that person than
Mm.
making sure it shows up in every aspect of the game. It's
Yeah,
like-
exactly. Exactly.
Well,
You make it a plot point in terms of a specific
Yeah.
person in there. Yeah.
I mean, if you want to look at it, is if in the old times, which wherever you want to start at, if anyone came from another area and you weren't some kind of nobility or trader, you were anything that went wrong immediately came over to you. They all went through there, and people forget about that. Is you want to talk about
Burn the witch,
xenophobia?
burn them.
Oh yeah, I mean, even if it's just very similar to here in the United States. If you want to talk about gangs, you crossed the wrong, you're like, I didn't even know what was supposed to be going on. Aren't we all the same? No.
Well, in the last Call of Cthulhu game that Geek ran that I played in, I had the issue that my character was French, and I notably didn't say anything in front of any NPCs, and it was great that we went out to a field where no one was around for a while. But then I made a reference to Hartlepool, which is the biggest joke about communities. So if nobody knows.
I don't know. I was going to explain that one to people after the game. That's quite an amusing story. Does anyone heard of the nickname for people from the British town of Hartlepool, monkey hangers? I've never heard of that. They're known as monkey hangers.
Not
because-
exactly local news to me, but
during the Napoleonic War, a French ship got wrecked off the coast of Hartlepool, and the only survivor from the wreck was a monkey that had been kept as a pet on board the ship. Now, England was at war with France at the time, and when they captured the monkey, they interrogated the monkey, and because it couldn't speak English, it had to be a French spy. So they hung the monkey as a spy. Hence people from Hartlepool are nicknamed monkey hangers.
the state I'm from has the pig war.
There's this. What was that? West Virginia, Kentucky?
What?
The Hatfield and McCoys.
Yeah, the Hatfields and McCoys, though, that's a long-standing family.
It was,
thing,
but it was over a pig. I mean,
Well, yeah, mine actually has a war between Canada and the United States over a pig. So in Washington State.
we have the Yellow Rose of Texas, which is technically a prostitute. So
One great story from my home state, to completely diverge from the topic here, but hey, why not? It's late in the stream, and Sax just went quiet.
I'm gonna pull it. I'm gonna do the job of pulling it back on topic in a bit. But come on.
But so the town that I went to high school in, and where I kind of spent the latter half of my childhood out on the farm in, was originally the county seat. The town of Snohomish in Washington, and then there's actually a larger city on the coast there where there's now a Navy base and stuff called Everett. Everett became the county seat because they built a county hall, a county seat, and then commando raided the city of Snohomish, stole all the records, and took them back to Everett and seated them in their county hall. They seized the county seat by force and skullduggery. Yeah, there wasn't a fight. They just snuck in the middle of the night and stole everything, and then locked it away and said, "Come get it."
That's one way of taking over.
The funny thing is, going back a couple videos, inspiration. There's your next campaign.
I mean, I'm about to throw something at my Shadowrun players because of the whole faction turn I've done. One of the factions have bought an ability called Monopoly, and they've used that against because we're playing in Seattle. They've used that against Seattle's ports. They run the monopoly of the ports, meaning they now control a bit of the prices for supplies into the town, and one of the players is playing a mechanic. So it's just this is all going to happen overnight. It was an overnight agreement. They just suddenly went boop. Anyway, let's go back to rules.
Rules. Okay, and this might be a bit of a touch paper one. Class and race, level limits and restrictions. I've seen so much pushback on that sort of topic online. I've not experienced it at the table because I basically said when I'm running the games, I abide by these. When you create your characters, have a look at these tables. These are your limits with your current stats and your whatever your choices are. And the players have just said, okay. But online, I've seen so many people say, "Oh, I'd never play in a game with anyone who did that."
Fine, there's one less DM for them.
True.
That's like end of the day, like it's down to preference again.
Right. I never have to worry about that. I'm always the DM.
Yeah, same.
We always play the way I want to play.
So I like the idea of like giving restrictions and confinements to the players, because now they've got to think creatively rather than just like, I am a dwarf and I can just be anything. It's like, no, you've got limitations for what you can be. You know, you can't be a dwarf wizard. That's just no. But what you can still go out and do, you can still go and be a priest thief, if I remember correctly, and off you go. You can go and do these things. And in terms of the levels, I can take it or I can leave it. Personally, I don't feel that it adds much to my campaigns. But for if I was playing in another group's game and they said we use this, it's like, okay, cool. I know what I'm going for.
But you want to know something is, if this is true, most groups play for 6 sessions, which I'm not disagreeing. Even if you play for a couple years, we're talking about the modules like you're talking about there, John. You know, if you're going up, if you're multi-classed, God forbid that you're a fighter, magic user, cleric, and as an elf, you're going to level like once a year. Right?
I'll have to admit, I hated level restrictions and class restrictions.
I did, but I understand why it's there from a game design standpoint.
Yeah.
Those are things that are in there, and then the other part that comes down to it is, you know, what levels are you playing up to? Because when you start looking at it, unless you have really low stats, and that's the other thing to work towards, most players are going to be like, okay, if you can play a halfling, you might play a fighter thief. A dwarf, to be fair, even though I know it was an NPC, was a fighter cleric. Because I always went, why wouldn't you allow him to be a cleric? That was the one thing I did do. But you hit that cap fairly, you know, 8th level is still pretty powerful depending on what you're going through. And how many modules went above 8th level?
Most campaigns peter out then again anyway.
Yeah.
So. But although, did that have to do with level limitations?
It was almost...
What's the point of playing anymore if I'm an elf, fighter or whatever you know?
I use the adjusted level limits and options from Unearthed Arcana. The level limits aren't much higher. In fact, in a lot of cases, they're pretty much the same. The only real gain is for single classed characters. You can go 2 levels higher. What it did open up, though, was the traditional sort of fighter cleric dwarf. It opened up clerics for most races, and that's the bit I like from Unearthed Arcana, because I agree that clerics of other races should be available.
To be fair, I think we did use some obscure dragon article that had some sort of XP penalty for other races going above their level limits or something like that.
That's always an option. And I think Grumpy Old Slang gets it right here in that they can always be adjusted depending on the setting, on how the races are applied in various campaigns. Yep. They were specifically designed for Gygax's Greyhawk campaign, which is human centric. He wanted people to play more humans than anything else.
Well, that's the thing. The setting is baked into the original D&Ds.
Yes.
It has some basic conceits of
still
the
is.
fantasy world that you're.
It
Well,
still
yeah.
is. Fifth edition has been designed with Forgotten Realms in mind.
Yeah, but even they've gone way out of the way from how Forgotten Realms originally was presented, which was kind of like the other Greyhawk. Yeah.
A more magical Greyhawk, really.
Yeah.
Well, true, but even still, it was nowhere near as magical as it was in 3.5 or even the latter parts of second edition, where you had, was it the one All Realms catalog, which was Fantasy Amazon?
Sorry, it's right here.
It's a great book, don't get me wrong, but the idea that the NPC in there could get you your stuff no matter where you were.
No,
it's kind of funny. I'm like, all right, so that little box with a smiley face shows up, and
I mean, even looking back on these class level limitations, unless you had really
does
low
that mean
stats.
D&D predicted Amazon?
Yeah.
Actually, that'd be a good campaign pitch. You are fantasy Amazon deliverers.
That would be a fun campaign.
Here's your fucking bag of holding with your gear.
That's exactly what you. Exactly, but like, just look at what you can accomplish with that. Like, honestly,
can you imagine having to go down into the Underdark just to find the guy you're supposed to deliver this to?
Hey, Gingerbeard, that's called Futurama in the D&D setting.
But the thing is, you go. Sorry, go on.
No. I mean, I'm just looking at when you look at the class level limitations, and you're looking at, it's like, okay, unless you want to be a gnome fighter or something, you're still at 7th or 8th level, and that means you're playing almost all the adventures until you go way up. I think it's only for those when you really want to go past those levels that you're really getting it. But 7th level is pretty respectable, and if you're multi-classed anyway, everyone's going to be a level or 2 above you anyway.
One thing I'm going to, I mean, just remember you've just mentioned that often quoted thing about campaigns in 5th edition being over in 6 sessions. I've seen it quoted a lot in old school circles, that statement, and I think people are getting the wrong impression from that. It's not that campaigns are meant to conclude and reach top levels in 6 sessions. It's that so many players come into the game now who are very, very casual, and thus, because people have shifted online and people are less committed, most campaigns simply peter out after 6 sessions. Now, whether that's due to lack of commitment, I say more casual players, it's all open for debate. But I think people have taken that sort of comment that was made about campaigns lasting 6 sessions slightly out of context.
I think what I looked at it is that's as long as the players can remain together as a group before it fractures for whatever reason. I mean, to give you a perfect example, I was online, and I like to play early in the morning, which is why it would work out really well when you were doing your Call of Cthulhu. And we had a group that was doing it. It was like, okay, so we had this one group, and then people dropped out, or real life took over for whatever reason. And it just, the DM overslapped. At a certain point, it just, I would be there, one other person would be there, but the other 3 people may be there or maybe not. And it's like, look, make some kind of commitment. We're only doing it every other week. And I think that's the hard part, is it takes commitment. And and you're right, when you say campaigns, it's not that's because that's what the players want to do. That's just as long as everyone can get everything together. And I think that's sometimes the hard part, which I can't remember what ours did. I think ours, until COVID, and that, to be fair, I think COVID killed a lot of stuff too, is when you were looking into that, is we were going through, and then COVID happened. We said, okay, well, we'll just wait a month. Well, a month has now been almost 3 years or 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. Similar thing happened to my group. People change of circumstance or whatever because of COVID. But it's one reason why, in terms of my Discord, I'm running quite a few one-shots and things like that, simply because I'm almost testing the water to see which people are going to be committed to longer games, but I want to offer people who can't commit to longer games an option to get a bit of gaming in. Eventually, I'd like to have a decent Call of Cthulhu campaign with more organic characters running. I know on the latest video, I mean, Mage's Musings made a comment about that particular adventure being overly linear, a little bit characters are too scripted, but that's often the nature of a one-shot adventure. In the long term, I would like to get a Cthulhu group going where the characters can be more what the players want to play, and things develop over time more organically, and instead of hammering your sanity like with a sledgehammer every session, it'll be more of a drip effect, and insanity effects would slowly filter in rather than just bang, there you go every time. But it's a long-term thing.
Oh, I agree with you. So there's so much to these Texas. You're heading out. I let you.
Yeah, I'm off. See ya.
See you later. I feel the same way about that. I mean, having Gingerbeard there with his whole thing of there's not a mirror, so thank God I don't have to see to a cliff. I mean, that was just classic for that line. I don't have to see him twice or in double. I would, that would be great, but a lot of times for myself is I have a young son. I say young. He's mouthy now, but he's 13, so I want to take him certain places, and I want him to do this. I want him to wake up by
families,
and you go, okay, it's hard for me to allocate every week for that aspect. It's not so hard for like every other week or something like that, but and then of course now you get holidays, and everything gets pushed back. At least here in the U.S., you're like, all right, now what do I do? So it isn't until you suddenly get into January where everyone's like, okay, we can play again. So I agree with you on that. It's hard to get the group in. And the other thing is they really have to be dedicated. They have to know what they want to play and what they want to do.
Yes.
And you have to have a good group together. And that was part of the reason I enjoyed the in-person stuff, because I know everyone talks about this, but to me, it was as much for us having a huge, potluck meal. It would be the kind of thing every time we come over, we'd say, hey, what do you want? I'm bringing fajitas. I'll make cobbler. I'll make mashed potatoes. I'm bringing in chips. And so it was nice that and we played with the group, I guess, from 17 to, I guess I was the oldest, about 46, 47 at the time. But it's hard to get everyone to sit down to do that. And and the other problem I hate, and this is, don't come late to a game. Now you've just wasted everyone's hours when they have a certain amount of time. It's just simple courtesy. And I think that's the other thing that's missing nowadays is when it's online, like, they'll make it up. Oh, no, you don't understand. Especially as a DM, I made this for like 5 or 6 players. I have something in there for each of you. And now you're going to go through it. And so, yeah, that's sometimes how I felt about things. And then it always seemed to be something stupid where people got into a dumb argument. And, I don't like you. You're a poo-poo head. And, walk off. What was he mad about?
Yeah, that happens. And
we're
nerds. We overreact to those sort of things.
Sad about the drip. I tell you, someone who has got all the drip. I don't know if he's still watching. I saw him in the comments earlier as Doof. Because just thinking about saying regular games, like when he set up the pedantic march, and it died off after a while, but just doing that West marches, just organising, having a couple of DMs in Euro time and a couple of DMs in American time. For a while, that was magical. Like, that was a really good way to run stuff. So yeah, thought I'd give him a shout out.
Yeah, I mean, I was in for about the first 4 or 5 sessions before I just couldn't really commit my Tuesday nights anymore to that. Like, my channel, I had to start setting aside time to making videos regularly because my channel was beginning to grow and I wanted to keep it growing. I wanted to keep it building. So I had to sort of think, okay.
But that was the other nice thing, because like players could just swap in and out. It was just whoever said like, well, I want to do a session here. Who else can do it? And yeah.
And I think it's easier to commit. I don't want to call it a one shot, because actually even our one shot was 3 shots. When you look at it, it was 3 campaign sessions, even though I came in at number 2. I think it's easier to get someone to commit to a session, say, hey, look, this will take 3 or 4 sessions. And people going, oh, okay, I can do that. But man, otherwise it's like a bowling league. You got to be there. Everyone's relying on you. And I think that's the hard part for some of them. And I don't want to be, we're all talking about this. It's a lot easier, I think, that if we ever got into an old folks' home to have everyone sit around and play video games or whatever. Like, we're all going to play D&D tonight. Why? Because we can't leave.
Yeah. I mean, if I do run a Call of Cthulhu campaign, it would be episodic. And what I would say is anyone who's interested would make a character, and anyone who I'd say, okay, I'm going to be running a scenario that will take 3, 4, 5 sessions. If you're available for those, you're welcome to join in. But then the next scenario, other people could join in, or whatever. That would be the idea, just to have something going. I'd probably use the Hudson and Brand campaign base for that, which is a very nice add-on for Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
But that's all something for the future. Something for the future.
Even something like Horror on the Orient Express, like you're on a train with a shit ton of people. If somebody drops out and somebody wants to come in, there's a new passenger. Whatever.
Yes, I could do that, but that the level of commitment to running that campaign I've showed these books off before, but that's the first book of the campaign, and the second book of the campaign I have down here.
That's
the second book of the campaign.
The Call of Cthulhu campaigns, those take you, that's like an episodic series of, for how players want, and that's great. And when you want everyone there, but I remember even trying to do stuff locally, which wasn't too bad. This was before COVID, but I think it was on I won't call it school night. It was on a workday night, and I wasn't a huge fan of staying up too late for that because it always screws me up the next day. And then, of course, the next part is that it comes into, then I had to go travel, so I miss a week, and then by that time you can, that's the hard part, is making sure everyone's there every week too. Even if they want to be, work still gets involved. Which is why when you were a kid, you're like, oh, well, we're trapped here. We can beat every night.
Let's not forget the being an aging DM, and just like some days you're just not up for it. Like if I don't get a nap on game days, I'm not running. And it sounds bad, but
man.
If I'm not occupied all the time, then I definitely need a nap. My on a work day I never nap, but
I agree with you on that. But that's one of the reasons that I liked playing in Geek's game, was because it worked right at the right time. Because I normally wake up about 6. Doesn't matter what time I go to bed. I still wake up around 6 in the morning. And then, once we're done by noon, I'm like, you know what? I can take a nap now if I need to.
Yeah.
I would, if I was to do a Call of Cthulhu game, it would be a fortnightly one at that sort of time. The Saturdays that I have off work, which is alternate Saturdays, 2 till 6 p.m. my time, which would be the same sort of time again. So we might, it's something for the future. When I've got a little bit less, I've got quite a bit of preparation to do for the MERP campaign, because it looks like they're wandering off in a random direction next session.
Those bastards.
You can't have walking simulator TTRPG and allow them to walk your ways. No, I do like a lot of. I know we were talking about rules. I do like some of these things in there. I like the Call of Cthulhu experience point system, because it encourages you to use skills, but you don't feel too bad if you don't go up in skills, because you still roll for them. And I think that helps out from that. So you feel like you're advanced. That's one of the reasons I actually like skill-based systems, is because your character can still advance. It's just not normally you're not becoming the best sword fighter anymore. You're like, well, you know what? It'd be nice to pick up like a fire building skill or equivalent that I don't have yet. So your characters become much more broad, and instead of, like the super specialization example for travel or anything always seems to come from character creation, not from character play.
One thing I've noticed about skill-based systems also is I don't think when I'm playing them, I really care so much about advancement as much. Without that carrot of new level abilities and stuff along the way, I'm much more content to just sit there and play within the existing skill set because it's how I apply the skills, not how I game my abilities or my armor or whatever, and stuff like that. What you get in the fantasy game, because I remember playing Star Wars, the old D6 system, and you go up so slowly in that. Eventually, you'll get so powerful that you can smack Darth Vader around like he was a toddler, but and that's the game is broken on the high end, but it takes you forever and a half to get up there. But even like with Call of Cthulhu, you're investigating stuff, so I mean, you can investigate pretty consistently all along and still have fun.
Well,
There's nothing sitting out there going, if you go up 2 more levels, you can do the thing. And then you're like, I can't do the thing yet.
well, here's the other part. Is even if Call of Cthulhu allowed you to maximize your stats, you're still super squishy.
Yeah, you're still one gunshot away from paralysis.
I mean, for Call of Cthulhu, even if you maximize all the stats, yes, you're less likely to die. That's fine. It's like, okay, I have 100 in everything, or whatever you want to do. Okay, great. Okay, now you fight an old one. Well, what do? I run, because there's nothing I can do that will actually have impact.
Depends on, am I fighting an old one as in a monster, or are we hanging out at an old folks' home? But
well, I mean, if I'm playing a Norwegian guy who has got like 100% in drive nautical vehicles, I can take out Cthulhu. That is written into the book.
Yes, yeah. He must have made his sanity check there when he saw Cthulhu.
Oh yeah, good point.
Well, it makes you wonder: was that really Cthulhu, or was that just an image of Cthulhu?
Yeah.
But that's fine. It's you're still, you don't know what it's going to be in there. And to be fair, you don't have to have a nautical skill of 100. You can have a nautical skill of 10 and just roll lucky. So I think that's sometimes why I like certain things like that, because no matter how great you become, you're still not going to become beyond a certain level. So it's really the danger of Call of Cthulhu is still your sanity. Doesn't matter how good your stats are. As your sanity starts dropping, so does your effectiveness. Well, sort of, or until you start summoning things.
The biggest danger of Cthulhu is totally missing all the plot points that have been laid out in front of you and going off on weird tangents on what you think the scenario is about.
Forcing the keeper to make up random details about people who aren't in the scenario, and try to describe hospitals and shops in a town that he knows nothing whatsoever about, all on the spur of the moment.
But those are the fun things I think that come from it. I'm not against, like you said, it's whenever we're talking about rules, like, okay, even if I wanted to, it's like, will this make you any better? And then the question is that certain games, that's probably the reason I do like skill-based games, even is, you're a little bit tougher to kill, but that usually means that you're kind of dumber because you think that you're impervious, like Sexy talked about Shadowrun. Oh, you know what? You're going to go down if you aren't smart. It doesn't matter what your stats are. And then that's one of the reasons I do like it, is I can make characters stronger without anything else. So,
yes, I am going to use this the fact that chat have switched over to talking about this this Friday. I'm going to mention the fact that this Friday is my birthday. I'll mention it again, and the first present that I'm getting is currently sat downstairs and I can tell you now it's two crates, each of 6 bottles of ale, and there's a good chance some of that will be consumed before I start the Friday night stream. So it might go off on odd tangents. We shall see. But last time I got inebriated, I wasn't too inebriated. Well, I was that one time when I drank a half bottle of port and a bottle of wine. That was completely off on a tangent.
Oh, what's the? They kicked
No
me out
K.
2 years ago from the. Okay.
No K5K. You're not in the 51 club. We used to talk on Pedantic server. Your voice sounds far too young.
But yes, I will be 51 this Friday. Oh God. Oh well, these years are flying by far too quickly.
I mean,
Thank
your
you.
voice sounds too young as well. Not like Saxius, who sounds like a 60-year-old man.
People who come into our shop think all think I'm about 40. So that's it. I just have to then show them the top of my head. that's the giveaway.
I'm over 50.
Yeah, look at Ian. Look at your head of hair.
Well,
Yeah, I cut most of it off on purpose.
well, part of it I think
It's actually like a 5-inch mohawk, but
Al, I will have to quit early for the chill stream because I have work on Saturday morning. So it's going to be a case of going into work with a bit of a hangover, but I will have to get a little bit of sleep. So I can't go too late this Friday, but it's my work weekend. It's not a play weekend, unfortunately. Anyhow, I think we've finished the topic, haven't we, really?
I'm trying to think of any other rules from whatever
Well,
game.
you mentioned spell components at the start, but I don't think we've actually fully talked through spell components.
Well, no,
Yeah.
we haven't. No, and that's something I really would like to incorporate much more in my games and have players actively make a point of seeking out spell components just to add that depth to spell casting. I'd love to hear my players go through the process of I take out a pinch of bat guano and
or eat the live spider.
yeah.
I have one player who would never cast that spell.
You know what? I don't even mind spell components. The problem that I have with most spell components is they're too common. Bat guano. I'm like, oh, fine. I'll just put it in a little pouch. I mean, to me, I feel like Batman with the little pouches for each of the little things. And like, all right, I'll just grab some of this and I'll grab some of this. And that's, I wish that the more powerful spells, even though they use some case where it's like 1,000 gold piece pearl or something, that's where it really gets into it. But I when I start looking at it, or like you said with the live spider, I'm like, well, that's not too hard until you just get the little glass to put it over the spider.
I don't think it's the cost of spell components that is the fun part of them. It's the fact that most of them are easily ruined.
Well, and you're absolutely right there. Especially
a pinch of dust easily becomes a pinch of mud. And that live spider, well, he was live until you got knocked down the hill, took 2d6 falling damage, and landed on your pouch that broke the jar and squished the spider. I mean, it's I think the common ones they balance out by being relatively easy to take away from players. Remember, old D&D was also just full of crap that wanted to destroy your stuff.
Yeah, and that's often forgotten. That is often forgotten.
Nothing destroys your stuff anymore.
Well, exactly. Well, I agree with you on that. Is when you start looking at the spell components, of course, usually what would destroy your spell components was killing the mage anyway, or the wizard anyway. The magic user was like, I got 10 hit points. I'm like, yeah, you're 4th level. I fell, 20 feet. Like, yep, you're dead.
Well, and the other thing too is I think the commonality of spell components also feeds into sort of the same thing of having characters die, in that a lot of those hardships that people see are absolutely ways to get more out of your adventure. side quests to find somebody to raise the dead party member, or going on that quest for the temple. But then again, going back to spell components, okay, all your crap got wet. Now you got to find a cave with some guano to get your bat guano back. What else is in that cave? It's D&D. It's not Bolivia, which is bad enough, but D&D is going to be
Having played a necromancer for a long time,
where you're going to get the bodies.
a character death is great. It creates new spell components.
I have also played a necromancer, and yes, it is the debate between players. Then it was like, I don't want you to bring my character back as a zombie. It's like, well, it's just fucking there. Like,
You haven't got a choice.
yeah, we weren't gonna pay to like resurrect them. Like,
well, actually, if you raise them as a zombie, they can walk themselves to the ancient temple where they can get resurrected. Now you don't have to carry them.
My necromancer
Modern
wasn't very
problems
nice.
require
My necromancer
modern
wasn't very nice. I mean, one of his favorite tactics was to they'd kill a few guards and then sort of retreat a bit, and he'd raise those 2 guards as zombies and send those 2 guards to meet their former friends. And he took great delight in the reintroduction of good buddies.
I'm just remembering a 5e game of White Plume Mountain. As in to mine, not everyone's. So people who have played White Plume Mountain will probably know the room I'm talking about. The slidey floors and spikes with super tetanus.
Yeah.
With even more bullshit loaded on top that I won't spoil. Because I was playing Necromancer, our solution basically was to just like raise everything we could as zombies to pour them into the pits so they form some sort of
send them ahead,
some sort of bridge that we could finally get over.
Excellent.
I mean, there's so many great things. I think I do like spell components. You're right; they're easy to take away. Oh, you fell in the water. All right, now what? It's
the big takeaway there, though, is I think that by removing so much of the hardship, and again, I'm going to air quote the fuck out of that, because it removes a lot of the opportunity from the game, and that's as a DM and as players, we've had so much fun just chasing down and recovering from the crappy things that happen. It's like, I'm out of stuff. What am I going to do? I'm out of arrows. We're in the middle of the woods. I've got to find the materials to make some, or find somebody in the woods. Are there elves around here? Maybe we can go buy some arrows from the elves, but the elves don't like us. Well, that's a risk we're going to have to take.
Yeah, I mean, I really do. That I mean, I like some of these things. Now, I don't like keeping track nearly as much, but I do like the other systems that they have. Whether it's Conan or Forbidden Lands, whereas you use it up, your dice start decreasing. Oh, I'll have all this. Okay, now your dice decreases from a D10 to a D6, and then from a D6 to a D4, and then once you've used up all your D4, it's gone. And you roll it every time. I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine as long as players are not rolling one die at a time. I don't want to keep track of every little thing, and I think part of it also comes down to, as when I was younger, we knew people cheated so much all the time, and now as I get older, I'm like, the only person really cheating is yourself.
Yeah.
Out of the experience, so whenever we're rolling dice, I like rolling my big die, but I accept failure just as much as success because sometimes it's more fun that way. But
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think the farthest I could go from encumbrance would be any system that didn't require me to just have to calculate another way. So you had mentioned in another stream, kind of, or maybe it was in one of our discussions, the Omen, the kind of aliens method of doing it.
yeah,
But like Eastcloft, which I've been looking at lately because I'm gearing up for a Norse revenge campaign, has a cool system of, they just have a supply rating, and it still gives you that jeopardy because you watch your supplies dwindle as you continue. And so it's not hyper focused on the specifics, but it still gives you that aspect of diminishing, supply.
Well, and that's what I mean is I don't want it. And how do I want to put this? It's not that encumbrance is bad. It's just like the old. I want to call it the old lone wolf stuff, where it's like you're allowed one armor, so many weapons. You're allowed a backpack and so many regular items. I mean, it's things like that where the players can see what they have, and you can go over and say, okay, that seems reasonable. But I think it's the tracking everything to every last gold piece, and well, this isn't that heavy, but this counts as 100 gold, because it's bulky. That's where there's a certain point where, like, okay, it's becoming too mechanistic, rather than me saying, all right, your armor weighs 2, your weapons weigh, you have 3 weapons, those weigh 1. Do you have any other big items? No. Okay, then let's move on. I think Pugmire does a good job of, you actually roll to see if you have it. In certain cases, if you don't, you just forgot it. I'm like, okay, that's fine too. Yeah, I mean, like that is, the bundle system or something. I don't mind as long as they're big. But I don't want it where I'm calculating every last gold piece and go, oh, look, you just went over this amount. No.
Maybe for example, you say your backpack has 4 slots in it. A week's rations takes 1 slot. A flask of oil takes another slot. A rope takes another slot.
Exactly.
One slot left. And you don't have to be specific about everything. It doesn't have to be entirely accurate, but I suppose it is a quick way of working it, and I could see players being more amenable to that than having to do the maths every time.
Well, that's what I mean. Is it goes through something like that, and players, I think it works out well. I know that some people want to put down every last detail, and that's fine for certain things. But I, as a DM, I mean, I hate saying this, I'm not going to be checking over your character sheet to see if you remember flint and tinder. If it seems reasonable that you have it, you have it. If it seems like it's a specialty item, then you need to have marked it down or where you got it. But it's
in Call of Cthulhu, if people someone asks me if they've got an item, and if it's applicable to their profession, they probably have it. If it's not, then I'll ask for a luck roll. There you go. There's a mechanic in there already.
That's a cool mechanic, actually.
Well, and that's what I mean. That's what I think Pugmire does. Like when you have to check for our phones. Do we have our phones on with us or not? Okay, if it seems reasonable in there, I'm not trying to get like I would be if I'm packing up for a war zone where I have to count every item. Let's make sure it's this, make sure it's that. It's like that's kind of assumed that experienced characters will have these things at some point, unless it's a big item. And a big item, yeah, okay, you need to put that down. But if you went over,
it depends on the nature of the scenario, the characters, and what have you. I mean, certainly in that Call of Cthulhu scenario, the idea was you didn't have anything because you'd got where you were by running away in blind panic, and you weren't expecting to have to come up against a mythos entity, so you weren't going to be prepared. But going back to components, one way I have managed to engage my players regarding components is by having them find recipes for potions, and with 3 or 4 sometimes quite vague but hard to find items, and potentially dangerous items, the breath of a gorgon, that sort of thing.
I think that works. We can all complain about video games, but sometimes it pays to video gamify things and just flip
but
it.
You can make those into quests, and I found that they bringing the idea of having material components in the world in order to produce magical effects. My players seem to jumped at that. They were like, wow, it's a recipe, and it becomes a quest, and I can then create an adventure around it.
I even created lesser magic items out of really rare herbs and stuff. Like if you find this flower and you brew a tonic out of it, it can give you like in 5th edition terms, one use of the divination spell, it also poisons you for a day. But because I like it, I like advantages with a cost. I made an herb called Ratbane. You can use it, you can grind it up and sprinkle it around your room at the inn, and it keeps the rats away. It's
Yeah.
like
I mean, I won't use it. I won't have magic item shops in my games, but I will have apothecaries.
or some old crazy guy in the woods who can.
Yeah, and he might have a very simple recipe, and it'll make a healing salve. That
But
if you
he'll
apply
also
to
need you to collect hedgehogs for him.
yeah, and he can make you a healing salve that will heal you 1d3 hit points for an application. Just
and I
something
think
small, something minor, but something that makes everything feel nicely grounded.
Well, see, that's what I like about potions is you can do that for the players to grab components, and it's more of a recipe. And Conan in there would do more of alchemy rather than magical for stuff. It's like, oh, okay, yes, this will magically heal you, but you have to go get the Eye of Newt and this and that, and so then the players like, okay, hey, we just heard that that there's a giant newt over here, and then the hag over here, and then this over here, and it kind of encourages them to go out and get that. Why not a recipe for weapons? Well, you can, but my view on that is you have to get mithril. That's the kind of thing. It's like, oh, okay, which I know Kim's from the Dungeoneers survival guide, where they started talking about that.
Well, you can also do that. I mean, for weapons, I mean, maybe there's a pond somewhere where if you dip your sword in that pond, it's magicked for till the next full moon. So then your players who need to kill the werewolf that's bothering the county can get them. I mean, you can throw that stuff out there. Those side quests and those things just add texture.
My my necromancer I mentioned played in a campaign where the DM threw in a pool of blood, and I think his intention was we might dip our weapons in the pool of blood, and it was a temple to Baphomet, which we didn't realize at the time. And my necromancer goes, "Oh, blood! Oh, wonder who or what it's from. I'm going to taste some."
Oh no!
He sprouted horns, and okay, fair enough. K5K has mentioned here about the encumbrance honor system with spot checks done. That's pretty. That's something we did mention a lot earlier on the stream. That's pretty much how I run encumbrance nowadays. I will just randomly check people's sheets and go, no, you can't have all that. Sort that out for next session.
Because we use D&D Beyond, I'm always auditing my players' sheets. And so, like, between game sessions, we have a Facebook group set up and everything. I'll be like, hey, Scott, did you know that you're, like, you're overweight and can't move? You're going to have to trim some stuff off your gear before we start playing next session. And that player that I mentioned has... it's we have to check him a lot.
Well, and I that's why I think it comes down to it is, okay, this is a big item, is it not? And how much does something weigh? It's like saying, oh, do you have a lighter? Well, okay, it's does it make sense for your character to have a lighter? But do I need to count that as encumbrance? Not unless you're carrying like 500 lighters,
Seeing some of the chat comments in chat, we've been enjoying a new 5th edition thing that I just put on. I know 5th edition isn't everybody's thing, but there's a supplement that came out called Monster Loot. It's on drive-through, and it's all the stuff you can harvest off of monsters, and like the little temporary, while they're still good, magic components that they can be, or even magical effects.
I was going to say, Squirrel Hermit is gone to get food. I am about to go to bed, but if I don't say Hackmaster, Hackpedia of Beasts did it way before, was awesome, then yeah.
I always thought that was the great thing about the Hackmaster book. When I read it, I'm like, why doesn't every other monster book do this?
That and the monster tracks. It gives you
I also missed the lore thing that they used to have in, like, was it 3rd edition or maybe 4th edition, where they actually had the lore DCs on monsters. I used to use the commonality of monsters for that.
One good thing about the popularity of 5th edition is, okay, I think we probably all agree that the standard of WotC's official books has declined in the last 3 or 4 years, or at least it's moved away from what we, as slightly the groggy side of players, would want to see in a game. But because there's so many people out there making stuff, that there's, as you say, there's a lot of good third-party stuff out there which can provide you with ideas for whatever system you're running. Certainly, I've heard a lot of good things about some of these other monster books.
I like the Kobold Press monster books. I mean, they're
I've
huge.
I've heard good things about them.
And a lot of their monsters are much more interesting as far as the mechanics that they come up with. Like, I'm still trying to figure out why exhaustion isn't used on life-draining undead. Like, that mechanic is great, but
yes,
exhaustion is one of those that could be used to such great effect to make it threatening without necessarily making everything super lethal.
Yeah,
and it's, that's the problem that I have with like you said, is the 3rd edition. This is why I think OGL has really saved D&D for that aspect, is because I think that they have done such great jobs. I mean, we can all talk about 1E, or 2E got way too bloated, but for 1E, even looking back on the Wilderness Survival Guide, not that you had to have it, but boy, that allowed you to really expand your games, and I think that's the thing that Hasbro has not done with the WotC, is they just haven't really, and I think this is the problem though, is I think a lot of the people that are there are not players. I hate saying it, but a lot of them are not. They're there to get their paycheck. They might play somewhat minor, but they're not.
All the people designing and calling the shots are hardcore players from back in the day.
well, no. I mean, if you look at like a lot of the ones that they put up at the front, there aren't that many. There aren't that many people in there, though.
They also don't release that many books.
Yeah. Well, but
they've tucked their best man behind the scenes.
Perkins,
Mike Merles.
Oh, I was going to say Perkins as well.
Perkins, he started doing dungeons for Dungeon Magazine.
Yeah, Dungeons for Dungeon Magazine. I'm watching Perkins DM games for the Penny Arcade guys. Like, he clearly knows what he's doing. He knows
I didn't like those at
deal
all.
with different players. Really?
And listening to him talk about games, he just, he gets it.
He's clearly a gamer, but I have to say, I did see some of those Acquisitions Inc. games, and I was watching them sort of almost incredulous, thinking, what is this they're doing? It doesn't look or feel like. But that's because I've been out to the D&D scene for a long time.
It's weird because he's trying to deal with the 2 Penny Arcade guys. One of them is like taking it super seriously and has built like this whole character arc, and the other one is just making dick jokes. So it's a weird balance.
But say the one for me who I have liked listening to and like reading the stuff he does is Mike Merles. I think he thinks more along my line of thinking, but he's been shoved into the background in recent years. But I sort of just reply to Duralumin here. I am going to wrap up the stream in about 5 minutes because it is bedtime for those of us over our side of the Atlantic. One thing I do like about MERP is that there are mechanics in the character development which discourage you from using the heavy armors early on. There's a big trade-off. And yes, Duralumin's character could have started in chainmail, but he'd have moved so slowly because his expertise in movement in that armor is currently very poor as a low-level character, that he's gone for rigid leather, which gives him the mobility but not as much protection. And I like those sort of trade-offs. But if he gets a second and maybe third level, he'll be able to develop his skills in the heavier armor and thus then start wearing it. Again, he'll probably slow down a little initially, but it'll become more usable, which is, for me, a good game mechanic. And I think MERP handles encumbrance is fiddly, but the way it meshes with the mechanics in the game is very good.
Talking about some of the things in there is I do think that, I think there's a lot of things there, and we all get used to one game system or another, and I do enjoy looking at some of them. I think Conan, if you get heavier, it slows you down too. Well, I like DCC and how they do armor, which is your fumble roll goes up the heavier you get, so it protects you for some of it. But I think there's and sometimes it's funny. What players will not accept in one game, they will happily embrace in another. Like critical hits or sanity. You're playing Call of Cthulhu. If you aren't playing, if you remove that sanity, the players will get mad. But if you throw that in D&D, a lot of them will get mad at you. I don't want to do that. And same thing with critical hits. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it comes down to people are playing 5th edition, at least, for example, because they want a certain play style. And that's it. I mean, you can argue all you want left and right about whatever is good or bad, but people coming to 5th edition are wanting an easier, heroic level of play. And they're just wanting something smoother that they can have fun with. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, it's just a different flavor of gaming. I don't eat pizza all the time, and I certainly like hamburgers, but, I'm not going to sit there and say that, damn pizzas because hamburgers.
I will. I will, because I'm lactose intolerant, so pizzas are.
I'm allergic to milk, but it doesn't stop me.
I
grew up on whole milk.
I like goat's milk for some, as long as I don't get into pine needles. But
or anything else.
Pine needles will work. It makes it taste kind of like licorice. And
I like licorice, so maybe I need
licorice
to drink
is awesome.
Black licorice is good.
Licorice milk. Anyway, it gives it.
I think Gingerbeard may be my long lost brother from across the pond.
Oh man, join the club. We've got like Zerbus on the Pedantic server, who's another Atlantic lost brother.
If there's any licorice in any vape flavor, I will not vape it. I don't mind it as a sweet, but no.
I meant for some of it is this is where, like we were talking about, it's a lot of players I think would enjoy different things. And I noticed that as much people say, we should keep people out. No, 5th edition has really allowed me to suck players into other games. And what amazes me is many players didn't even know there was another game besides D&D. Like I talked to my friends, and they, there's another game besides D&D. Like, yeah, right here. Look, I got Conan. And,
I think a lot of the resistance is just purely on the theory craft level too. A lot of folks they reel against it, or they believe the stuff that they've seen shouted across the interwebs, or in their local game store where there's one prevailing theory, and then they just buy into it, and they're just like, no, that's bad. I mean, have you ever played it? Again, it's like being pissed off at pizza if you've never had a pizza.
I've openly admitted to my players that I used 5th edition D&D and I used old school adventures converted to 5th edition D&D to intentionally pull them into systems that I preferred.
Exactly. That's what I
told them that. I said that. I said, look, it was my intention all along.
But I mean, that's okay for. Well, I mean, even if you get D&D adjacent, which are your third party stuff. Like some people love Pathfinder and things like that, and that's why I was joking with Elfbait about doing it wrong. You know what? If you're not enjoying it, for on some level, it's probably go do something else. There are better things in your life to do than waste your time doing things you don't like. I mean, if it's not making you money, it's not getting you where you want to go somewhere, then it's a side hobby. Don't do it just because all it does is cause a lot of anger and burnout. But like I said, I like doing these things. I like bringing these out for my friends. But that's why I also joke about whenever people say, "Well, I play the real D&D and I do this," and I always joke about you're playing it wrong. And what I really mean is you're going to play it wrong compared to someone's idea. As long as you guys are having fun, that's right for you. And that's go ahead.
And I mean, and that is the point of the game rules and the point of this stream in the end is to find what you enjoy, what your players enjoy, and try and come up with something that works for everybody.
Sorry, I've just seen Grumpy Old Slan's comment. Another installment in the YOG series of modules, The Case of the Licorice Milk.
No, there will not be that.
Which
there will not be that.
sounds like an album by The Fall. Like you see Marky Smith and lose 1d10 sanity points.
Well, what is anyone that sees the witch with the was it the ram that spoke or something? You know, you must drink the licorice milk. You know,
I haven't listened to enough Fall stuff. They're a band I should have gone into a lot more. Anyway, it is time for me to bring this stream to a close for another week. Once again, I will shill for Friday. It'll be my birthday. I might be a little bit tiddly. I'll be reading, hopefully, to conclusion, City of Thieves, the fighting fantasy book. We have managed to survive multiple sessions. We're still alive. We're still going. We're probably going to fail at the end by not having all the right items. But you are all more than welcome to come along and join in. Maybe even have a beer with me if it's the right time of day for you. And I would love to see people there. Contribute to chat. Come and say hello. I hate my birthdays, so you probably see me very grumpy at some point. I don't like being. I don't like getting older. It's something we all have to put up with. But once you get past a certain age, you dread more birthdays. But you're more than welcome to all come along. I am going to bring this stream to a close, but I want to thank everybody who's been on. Saxius, who's been and gone. Elfbait, as always, great talking to you.
Always have fun.
Always good. Gingerbeard, thanks for coming along as always.
Always wonderful.
And Omanal, as always, plenty. Omanal always has plenty to talk about, whatever the topic.
Well, that's true. Anyway, won't be with you guys next week. Parents are visiting, so
fair enough. That's no problem. Thank you to everybody in chat for contributing. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's discussion, and I'll see lots of you Friday and the rest of you next Wednesday. Good night, all.
All right, have a good night.